No mai haere mai. Welcome to the resumption of the ordinary meeting of council from the 23rd of June. Apologies, we have apologies from Bonnie this morning. I think it's broken down or snowbound. Was here, would somebody like to move the apology be accepted? Moved by Jeremy, seconded by Lyndall. All in favour say aye. Aye. Do we have any declarations of interest this morning? Do we have any? We have no public forums, petitions or deputations. No notification of ordinary, extraordinary or urgent business, supplementary reports or other. Not aware of any questions, so we'll move to item 6, which is the staff report. And Rachel, are you leading us into this first bit? Or just, yeah. The floor is yours.
Marina, Mr. Chair, basically the process today picks up from the hearing held last week, and what we'll be doing is considering the submissions and going through the matters that you sought further advice from staff on as we work through the submissions today. The summary of submissions in the back is in order of the submitters that we heard last week and then the remaining submissions. So that's what we'll be working through, and we'll cover off key issues that were raised and things you wanted reported back on as we go through. So I think we can move pretty much straight into going through those submissions if you're happy with that, unless there's any opening questions.
Give us a start page.
So that would take us through
Page 8.
Page 8.
So it's, yeah, these. Lloyd.
Sure. There's probably a couple of questions from the last hearings that I'd quite like to debate by themselves without actually talking about a particular submission, but the commonality is the David Rose, the ICC and Doug Fraser. But it raises some questions about what is 20%, what is 30%, and just trying to understand that a bit better, because that actually helps us. Because when we look at the submissions in the back, there is a very strong theme of 20%. And the Waituna option 1, I think it is by memory. There's no other debate, there's no other 16% conversation sitting in there either. So I'd sort of like to jump up a little bit and say, regardless of what my personal view is, I just like to understand the numbers, because Doug actually gave us a feeling that what we said and what we actually look at in the numbers looks more like 30% than it does 20%.
Mr. Chair, I think that's our proposal is to talk about the two hearings, both Federated Farmers and Doug Fraser. So both raise that so that we can discuss those big issues at the beginning.
So I think the deliberations really is how we reply to the questions around those matters, yes, but I think we need to sort of, that's my personal view, jump up a little bit and say, well, actually, let's just go back a little bit, clarify what these numbers actually are, how we actually see it, and then we can look at their issue individually. I don't know what others think. Yeah,
if you think of some of the submitters, and I don't, again, it's to criticise those who own land versus those who own a house. Because of capital value, you own land, you tend to have quite a large asset, and a 20, well, more like a 30% lift on the large asset results in the multiple $100s, maybe into the thousands of dollars that some people will see as a general rate increase. Whereas if it's a 30% lift on a $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 house, it's in the magnitude of $60 to $80, $100 maybe. So and there is a difference between a tax deductible expense and a non-tax deductible expense. So okay, let's say a farmer has a $1,000 rate increase, general rate increase. That's, if he runs his business as a company, that's a 28% deduction for tax. And okay, there's also the GST component too. So we're not quite apples with apples, but there's still a significant number of, well, it's probably $600 or $700 as opposed to $60 to $100. Our issue, I see our issue is that how do we fund the shortfall from the cruise ship industry, or the cruise ship that's not there? So how do we fund our coastal work? Is it fair to put that on the capital value of landowners, or is it a Southland issue, a Southland problem to deal with, which everybody should, which more fits back into a UAGC adjustment? Everybody contributes an extra amount perhaps through the UAGC for a period of time while we don't have cruise ship revenue. If cruise ship revenue returns, and it should, do we then reverse it and give it back to the community?
So I think we might just have a general debate for a few minutes before we get started, and I certainly apologise for not picking up the word general rate, which I should have. We've read these things so many times before, and that did cause some confusion. The 20% was on the overall rate, and that's where the discrepancy came in between the 30-odd% just on the general rate, which it wasn't supposed to be. I guess after 20 workshops, you tend to read what you think is going to be there, and that was wrong, and that did cause some confusion in places, but it was actually good to have that clarified so that we get our documents right. And I guess there was sort of a bit of an assertion that, we hadn't done our homework on the annual uniform charge. We modelled right through to 30%, and that again caused some real discrepancies, and you could have had people in the town getting a 50% rise. And even though you might say it's a small amount, if you're a pensioner on a fixed income, that is significant. I think we've actually looked at the stuff in very fine detail, and we'll go through these submissions and we'll see where we land. But as Lloyd said, there was no real strong pushback on the 20%. I think a lot of people, I hope, nobody wants to pay more rates, realise that actually these guys are a bit of a rock in the hard place to have a reduction in revenue when you're being asked to do more. So anybody want to make some general comments? Linda.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up Councillor McCallum, I completely appreciate that big picture stuff is what we need to look at, but I would be remiss in my duties if I wasn't thinking about those submitters who asked for continued grant funding and the like. So, I don't think we should minimise those requests, because actually they will add up. And actually, to parallel with your point, Chairman, that income for them is significant to their operations, and most of them are working in a space that is environmentally important for our work too. So I think we need to make sure that we cover that off with due consideration. And there are a number of submitters who didn't present to us who preferred the 16% option, so we must not forget that they are in the mix as well.
We will go through and reply. There'll be reply goes to all submissions whether they presented in person. So I've got David, Jeremy, then Eric, and Lloyd. Yes, sir.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just, are we going to have a look at where we are financially at some stage prior to actually making a decision on where the rates should be set? I don't know where things are, but are we going to have a look at where we're sitting?
Probably can't as part of this process, but we don't have to make a final decision today, and I'm sure Tanya will have a fair idea of where we've ended up. If not today, in the next few days.
We could have some bearing on exactly where we're going.
Jeremy.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I was going to ask the same question. It's about what is our financial position, because we're going to be a lot more up to date. It'll be interesting to see where we are in specific games. We have better information now than we did a couple of months or a few months ago when we were trying to set budgets. Around the UAGC, I think everybody knows my position on the UAGC, and we probably spent quite a lot of time because I've asked a lot of questions about it and making sure everybody knows what it can do and how it can be used. Obviously, and I'll back up that we did have a lot of time, and hopefully everybody knows a bit more about how it is utilised around the council table. But as we know, there wasn't much support in regard to changing 22% that we have at that stage, so, that's all.
Eric, then Lloyd is there.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I was just firstly just affirm the views that have been made that there was no outcry about the 20%, and that somewhat surprised me. I felt, I'm going to say offended, but a bit frustrated in the process that we had some of our submitters say things assertively and we weren't able to correct them and about the information that was available, and again the assertion that this was probably a staff performance to set these rates where they were, and we need to take another year to look at it when we'd spent 17 work days on the whole process. And I felt a little frustrated, and actually I haven't had a look at standing orders, but I think from my experience in hearing submissions in another forum, actually to cast aspersions upon those that are making them would have been out of order in that environment, where it's fair to criticise the plan, but not the people who did it. And I just think we need, before we get into it, to maybe tidy some of ourselves up about that process, because it can't be corrected in that actual forum. So I'm taking a wee moment now to just say some of the things that were said assertively were incorrect, and I found that frustrating, and I just want to put that on record.
No, a good point, Eric, and we must just check as to, we know we can only ask questions of clarification, but that's a good point about aspersions. So I've got Lloyd Essler, then Lloyd, then Peter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just following on from Lyndall's one, the city has got a fund to which people apply. There doesn't seem to be one here. Like, we've had various requests for various amounts of money, but it's sort of kind of haphazard. And there are other groups that want money that didn't put in, like the people who do the beach cleanups are looking for an annual grant of $10,000. I've got grants of around about $1,000 in the past for social sciences fair for things from years. I don't know where that comes from. It just sort of appears by magic. But I just wonder if we need to establish a fund to which people apply annually or twice annually to cover these various projects that they're doing.
So there are still grants in the budget, and there is the EDF money as well.
Yes, well, some things will be covered through the budget, but we do have an enhancement fund, correct me if I'm wrong, it's a reasonably small amount, but there is a fund here that people can apply to. Where is it sitting? Is it about 10,000 a year, or is it a bit higher?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we will be talking about it in deliberations, but there are some revisions being made to the Environmental Enhancement Fund, and going forward we'll have around 100,000 a year to people making applications.
That sounds very reasonable.
Lloyd.
So I'll just clarify, staff I'm sure would say that the position at the end of the year is somewhat irrelevant, and I say that nicely. If it's positive to our prediction, then it means that we actually raise less debt through this plan. If it's worse, then we actually have to effectively raise, and we've got the ability to do that, more debt to cover the rate forecasts that we have. The real place you will see that show its face probably is in year 2 of the long-term plan, where you don't take the full 5%, which is indicated you'll take a lesser amount. So we do have some flexibility sitting in there, is my point. I'm sure Tanya would actually agree with that this year. So we've actually got the ability to manage quite a variation sitting in there depending on how we come. But effectively, if we are better with our management, with OPAC's guidance and others, then we actually don't take on the debt that we forecast, which is beneficial to the council overall.
That's a good point. We have been deficit budgeting and still are for the next few years. So,
Can I ask that question if you like, Mark? Jeremy.
Tony, I've got Peter then Jeremy, but Tony, would you like to comment on that before we any other?
Yes, thank you, Chair. As I think a meeting in April, we forecast a savings of $1 million on our expenditure. Our recent update on that would suggest that it will be potentially closer to 2 million in savings. And I say that every year, that it's plus or minus $500,000. During this last financial year, the executive and the team, leadership team, agreed that we would be able to work towards some substantial savings. And that those savings were important to help to achieve the efficiencies that we believe we can, and to allow us to move the money into the areas that are the key areas. Now, that was a fundamental part of our LTP finance assumption. And I'd like to say that we are on track with that, which gives us confidence for the LTP budget. So I wouldn't look at it as being something that we need to adjust. I would suggest that it's a good indicator, as Councillor McCullum has said. $1 million on projected expenditure of $37 million is a small buffer. Sounds like a lot of money, but it's a small buffer, and I would encourage Council to think of it that way, that it gives us options going into the first year of the LTP. That's what I'd like to respond as Chair. And on top of that, though, we have some big variations in the market portfolio during the year, as you're aware. Primarily at the beginning of the financial year, and even during the year, we've had movements of $500,000 to $1 million. At this point, the market portfolio is sitting at $3 million above the closing balance of last year. So we have some unrealised gains sitting there that may consolidate in time to be quite beneficial. At this point, they're not consolidated, and I would suggest if you're following the markets, we'd suggest that it's not something that you would want to use or bank on at this point. But all good indicators.
No, thanks for that, Tanya. I'm just looking at some of those graphs we had. Like, we have made an efficiency saving of about $2 million. Still running at a deficit, but that's, anybody who I think looks at it and thinks we're not doing our best is misinformed. We've got Peter, Jeremy, then Alan.
Yeah, I think it does go a long way to show a bit of discipline in that buffer, but it depends what the size of that is. But that's, I think I just want to say, it's important that we focus on the things we had strong support on, not just on the things we had pushback on too. So regional leadership, community resilience, those are the two things that stuck out for me, we've got support on. And just in the context of today, how do we do this? Do we weigh their considerations on the level of the proposed commitment of those individuals, or do we take everyone as an equal? I'm just not too sure. I don't know if I should be asking the question or not of how that works.
Look, at this stage, I think we're going through all those submissions, and then we'll decide whether we make any changes at the end of it. It won't be on one individual thing. We've heard all those submissions. We'll come up with an answer for those people, and then I guess if there's any changes at the end of that, or council feels there should be any changes, that would be the opportunity to make them. Jeremy.
Yeah, all I'd say, and this is what Lloyd indicated, that I look at it that we accept the debt levels at a certain time as the debt that we want to take on, but if our position is in any financially better position, we've been able to reinforce our position at the start of the financial year, that if there's $500,000, $1 million, or whatever, that the consideration needs to be given against the rates that we're taking. It's a bit like saying, well, yeah, it was a budget, but we're just going to hang on to the money. And we've got an exceptionally high rate increase, so every percent means a lot for the ratepayers. And I would feel very uncomfortable if we sit here in our position from a debt point of view, which from my position, it's not a equitable, we can take that debt on to help smooth things out for the community. But if we take any more, I think it would be probably a bit of a kick in the guts to the community if we're in a better financial position, so we need to take that under. Yeah, I do understand there's been cost savings and all that, but this is probably from this position, a couple of months ago, if our investment portfolio is better, and yes, there is fluctuations, it's been fluctuating quite up and down for the last 3 or 4 years, but it's just being responsible. That's what I say, the view of it, so that's all I'll say on that.
A good point, and that's I guess, a discussion we'll have at the end of this process, and if that's at the high level. Alan.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. So again, it's talking about the numbers, and I know not everybody has probably delved their heads into the numbers maybe as much as I've had a look just the last couple of days. We've got this dilemma that central government's put on us, and they've given us this shovel-ready money. They've provided us with money ahead of time to spend on projects for the community's benefit, whether it be flood control work, jobs for nature, replacing a pump shed down at the near the airport. But it's a significant amount of money, and as a result of that, it puts the prospective financial statements into a somewhat of a quandary position. We're reporting a surplus, potential surplus of $7 million. At the same time, we're asking for a rate increase of upwards of 20%, and how that will get spread amongst the community. The shovel-ready money, is it for the benefit of Southland? Well, it is, but is it also helps this business, this entity, get through its troubles as well? It's got 2.8 to 3 million less from the cruise ship industry. So has the government shown any empathy towards us for that issue with shovel ready, or are they completely unrelated? The only outcome is that we've got more money in the bank than we ever thought we would have at this time of the year because of shovel ready. We also, as we've been informed, we're in a better place than we forecast we would be. We were forecasting a $2.8 million deficit for this year. I think it's more likely we're going to break even in that range. So that's upwards of $3 million of less debt that we won't have incurred, having made a likely break-even position rather than making a loss. So we are not as bad as a result of last year, and we're millions up as a result of shovel ready. That money will get spent over the next 2 to 3 years as it's planned. In 2 to 3 years' time, our cruise ship business, I hope, will have returned, and our funding position will be in a better place. So do we need that extra money off the community? That's my question.
Again, a good question, but I think one will do it right at the end. The shovel-ready money, you're right, it skews our balance sheet, but it's not money we can use for something else. It's there for a specific purpose, and really we did get that because of the work we've done on the deficiencies in our flood schemes. It was probably one of the fortunate things about 18 months ago, which actually identified weaknesses. And so when this thing came out, we'd already put in some figures, and so that's why we got that. I'll take Lyndall that we should probably start on that.
Thank you, Chairman. I realise I've already had a say, but Councillor B's just reminded me that I've had to remind myself that I'm not just looking at 1 year's big picture. I'm looking at a 3 or 4 year picture or a 10-year picture, and so any of that, the 20% increase now, we are also beholden to the 5% in the upcoming years, and so if we end up somewhat naively, perhaps in my brain, with a surplus, unexpected better performance, then that enables us to keep to that our promised 5% level in the coming years. So I guess my point is that I'm trying not to think of it just in this coming year. I'm trying to think of it in 3, 5, 10 blocks and how we might be able to meet our obligations and provide for our community over that time, not just one. Thanks.
No, I think that's been a good discussion, but I would suggest perhaps we go through all the submissions. At the end of this, we're better informed to actually make those decisions as to any changes council may wish to make on the rate levels. So we'll start on page 8, and I think we're talking about doing Federated Farmers and Dave Fraser together because there's
I
some.
think there are similar themes, so if we consider submission 31 from Doug Fraser and also submission 48 from Federated Farmers, they raise some issues in common. So perhaps if we address the matters relating to rates in UAGC, we can talk about those in general, and they will also be, by the time we get to number 48, we will actually address some of those issues at the same time, I think. Mr. Chair, would you like to perhaps, Tony could just recap on some of those matters for us? Would that be helpful?
Yes, that's fine.
Thank you. Would you like to lead through some of your notes, Tony, just to recap on our previous discussions in the workshops around the setting of the proposed, the two options and the UAGC?
Thank you, yes, so, just. One of the, as the chair has mentioned, there was an unfortunate position of the word total rate with general rate and the staff submissions previously, or the staff responses, which has been picked up and has caused some concern. Obviously, Mr. Fraser has calculated correctly his numbers using the word general rate. Of all the modelling and financials that were put to council during the workshops, we were working on a total rate, or the average total increase for the UAGC. So while the rate proposed is 20%, the UAGC increase would be 20%. If the rate was 16%, the UAGC increase would be 16%. What that does is it keeps the proportion of the UAGC that is paid as a total of the rates, percentage of the total of rates, where it sits now. Now, we did in the workshops go through, and we considered many of the other councils in New Zealand where they sat with the UAGC. We looked at the history of our own UAGC and what it had paid for in the past. And we looked at the total general rate that is paid by the population, which is the UAGC part and then the capital value component. So look at where that fell. Council has only 3 tools for rating. We choose to use the capital value, the land value where appropriate, and the UAGC. We don't have, we don't separate the rates out into rural. We don't have commercial rate. We don't do that. Those are, I won't say they're arbitrary, but they are decisions of other councils on how to rate, based on the type of rate payment. I mentioned before, we rate on the capital value, land value, and UAGC, and those are the tools that we have. And we looked at all of those tools during the workshop. So while we looked at sectors, the rural sector, the industrial sector, the residential sector, it was to look to see how the impact would be on those people. Not to change what the impact was, but to understand the impact that might occur. We also looked very much at the changes in property values underlying these at this time, that as a result of incredible changes in land and capital values within the residential sector at this point. So there's many parts of that we looked at. So I'd like to show you in summary then where we ended up with, just to remind council where we came to. So this analysis was provided, as I said, to allow us to see where the rates fell in consideration of the UAGC and whether in fact the 22% was a fair and equitable amount at this point, whether it could increase or be lowered. The total general rate in that column, row along the top there, suggests that the rural sector pay $5.7 million of general rate, residential 7.5, and the others, as you can see. The green is the value or total amount of rates paid on capital value. It's the percentage of the value of your land, capital value of the property. And then the UAGC is determined by the amount of properties in each sector. And the bottom line there says how much total general rate is paid by that sector dependent on the values of capital in that area. So the rural sector pay $32 of total general rate per 100,000 of value. Lifestyle 55, residential 84, and you can read 46 and 30. Now what we did in the workshops, and I've recapped yesterday for you, is if we look at the next slide, so that one was on the UAGC as proposed. This one is on what would it be if we had moved the UAGC to the 30%, that is the maximum. And just reminding you that it doesn't change the total rate, it moves it substantially dependent on the capital values that underlie those sectors. Residential's, of course, tending to be much smaller average capital values. So that change would put the rural sector total contribution of rates down to $28 per capital value, 100,000, residential to 94. And that was an important discussion that we had back on the 2nd of February. Now, the first slide, the 22%, is indicative of what it is today and this year, because the proposed LTP UAGC is the same percentage. So what we would be envisaging if you were to move to 30% UAGC is a fairly reasonable shift from the high capital value to the lower capital value properties. And that would affect not just rural, but of course commercial and very much so the utility sector, which is, in our workshops you might remember, it's very, very high capital value to land value ratios. So then in the same workshops we looked further into sample properties to give us an idea of where this might affect both our urban and our rural, residential and commercial properties. And on a dollar value, now in this graph we're looking at blue as proposed in the LTP, the UAGC, at $127.80, and the green is what would happen if we had brought in the UAGC that would equal 30%, which would be around a UAGC of around $173. Okay, the UAGC today is $106.50. So you'd be looking at a very large increase. Right, so the Winton housing would go from $43 to $72, and the Cargill housing would go from $63 to $90, and as you can read across there's some significant changes towards the far end where you would see the rural properties go. The one Mr. Fraser was suggesting, the Taito Bush Dairy Farm would go from $511 to $155. And these are ordered in capital value, so from the left is the lowest capital value property, on the right is the highest capital value property. So your Tussa Creek Dairy Farm in this sample is $9 million, and your Nightcaps housing I think is under 200,000. It just shows councillors the effect, the change is much more significant as you move across the range. In the next slide we look at that in percentage terms. And I agree that Mr. Fraser suggested that we shouldn't perhaps look at it in percentage terms, but it does sort of does allow for some comparison, the same comparison we've used in past years. We have looked at these in past years on a percentage basis to see if we're maintaining that degree of equilibrium. So Invercargill median would go from a 30% average increase in total rates to a 43% increase in total rates. The Taito Bush Dairy Farm would go from a 9% increase in total rates to a 3% increase in total rates.
Mr. Chair, could I ask, sorry to interrupt, could I ask a question about that? Because just looking at that spread and seeing that proposals to make significant changes to what we've already workshopped about would favour the farming community. Do councillors need to be careful because of their background of how vigorously they argue for one particular change or approach, given that they might stand to benefit from it, rather than people at the other end who aren't asking for changes?
Well, I think we all put a hand up to do the best for Southland, and we have to remember that. And we're actually, at the moment, relitigating stuff we've already done. It's probably good to remind us where we got to, and at the end of the day, if there's any appetite for change, that's fine. But I think it does just put back into your mind that, especially in light of some of the submissions saying go to 30%, that actually you would substantially drop the rural amount, and 40-odd% in the town is politically would not go down particularly well. But I think it's good to know that before we make those decisions. So I think that's, thanks to Tania for doing that.
Can I just add that so this information here was provided to council on the 2nd of February. Subsequent to that, we had information come in around the new valuations for the City Council, and we looked at the effect of that, and which in themselves was substantial. Councils on the 31st of March reconsidered the UAGC as a means of softening the effect of the rate increase. And again, we took the same information and we reversed it to reduce the UAGC and looked at the benefits to the communities, both rural, urban, both within the boundary and outside of the boundary, and discussed at length the difficulties of changing the UAGC to make these subjective type decisions, I suppose we could say, and the fact that they might have been one-off and may repeat in a different way in another year, in another community. And the result from that discussion on the 31st of March, Chair, was to not change it, to not reduce it, to not increase it. So we have spent some substantial time looking at the effect of how the UAGC does affect all parties in the community. And the proposal was to go forward with the UAGC at a 20% increase, the same as the total rate.
I think that gives fairly good background. Just remind me, we're going through these things, and you've got a staff recommendation for the feedback, but if council wants something added to it, we do that at this stage. Am I correct in that? Okay.
Yes. Those are the two major issues that we discussed in relation to this. I would just actually ask Jan, we have recommendations for every piece of deliberation. Do we need to adopt the recommendations one by one? Because the recommendations for this relate specifically to the adoption of the general rate, which happens a number of times through this. Is it sensible for us to be able to do this at the end? In consideration, I think it's three major. You could do that at the end. Yeah, you need to adopt that you're happy for the response. For the response, we're adopting for the happiness for happiness with the response, but the
But not
recommendation
necessarily, yeah, that
we'll
might
discuss
be-
at the end. Thank you for that clarification.
Mr. Chairman, it's not written here, but I'm sure Doug spoke to us about the general rate increase of 37 to 42-ish.
And I think that we should thank him for pointing out a discrepancy, and I think that's
I think
been
we
upfront
need,
and
we
say,
need, yeah, we need to follow it, reset, same way we've done the AGC. In my view, he was quite strong on that.
anything,
Can
Lyndall?
I just clarify that Councillor McCallum is suggesting that we add that to the staff response, the apology for the
Basically, thank you for pointing out.
Yeah, just to read it to make sure I knew what was going on.
Everybody's happy with that? Anything further we need to add to the response?
It's a part of the process of discovery, this is a good indication of why we have submissions, open for submissions, so very good of you.
Just to clarify, there's just one word we got, general instead of total, basically.
Yeah.
And
And, but we need to make sure that the numbers are correct.
Yes, right.
Like it's not a typo, but more than typo rather than.
well, yeah, that was amazing how many of us read that and read it the way we thought it meant, yes.
Okay, any further additions to that? Otherwise we'll move to. Somebody like, if we're happy with that response, somebody like to move and second the response to Doug Fraser?
We're not moving the recommendation that we.
No, well, I think let's leave that to the end in case it changes, so, yeah.
Oh, that is, whatever you do.
Moved and seconded by Jeremy, all in favour say aye.
Aye.
Right, we move to Jenny Campbell. It looks reasonably straightforward. Any additions to the staff recommendation?
Yeah, I think both of the recommendations at the end of this, we should discuss at the end.
Yes, I think in all of these, we'll leave the recommendations at the end.
So it's
So it's just the staff.
the commentary and the recommendation.
So I just wonder whether there should be a more general response to Jenny and maybe one or two others. There seems to be a good involvement within council business across the board, and she's made commentary about a number of aspects that we do. And we should probably just thank her for that involvement and note her continued interest in that work stream or those work streams. I think we should acknowledge, because it's not just a one target thing, it's actually, there's a number of priorities here that she's given commentary on. And that actually helps us in that flavour of direction and support. And we take fair criticism where it's due, and that actually helps us in our role as well. So I think we should actually put something else in there, and there's probably one or two others like that as well.
I agree.
I think you're right. I think we should acknowledge the time and effort people actually put into the submission process, and thank you, Squire, but actually even probably even the first one do the same,
Yes.
because people that did bother actually put quite a bit of time and effort, and I think we do need to acknowledge that. Whether we agree with everything they say or not is irrelevant. It's actually part
She
of
was
the
nervous coming into the
process.
process, and she's been in the community for a long time doing various things. It does take a step above just writing something down to come and talk to us. And that needs to be encouraged from those who do come forward and prepared to talk to us. We don't probably see us individually as intimidating, but probably collectively we are a bit intimidating.
So we can certainly put that in here. This goes into the record for the meeting, but I understand, and Jane can confirm for me, that we do actually respond individually to each of the submitters. And so I think we can be, a little more fulsome in our introduction into their personalised letters to thank them.
You happy with that? So we need to
I hope you move that route.
moved by Lloyd, seconded by Lyndall. All in favour say aye. Okay, 32, Murika Kai, that's page 14.
So there was a request, Mr. Chair, for us to come back with some more information around the support and climate. So I'm happy to just do that for a moment, if that's okay. Okay, so particularly, I think, if I remember rightly, Councillor Ludlow raised this particular point. We've spoken to staff about how that might actually play out. At this stage, it's hard to come back immediately with a figure of what that might look like, but what we will do is to to look at how that support can be given within our existing work programs, and not just in the communications area, but perhaps also through work in climate resilience and EMS. So we'll have a look inside. We don't think that it means that there's a new budget, but we certainly can look inside our existing work programs to see how we can do that support. And so staff will make contact with the Murihiku Kai Collective to do that. If you would like us to reflect that in the.
I think so, Mr. Chairman. I think some of the environmental work could actually be involved in there as well.
Support that, Chairman, the EnviroSchools thing, I was waiting for it to be mentioned and
It wasn't mentioned at all.
it wasn't addressed at all. We've actually done quite a bit of work in that area over a considerable period of time, and I would anticipate that it's going to continue.
So I think the key here is we want to link, while we're involved as an organisation, we want to link with some of the work streams as well.
Yes, so we'll note that work streams and also mention EnviroSchools as well as communication and emergency management.
Lyndall.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. My only other question is, do they want governance involvement in their work as well, or are we just looking at staff involvement?
In the few days between the meetings, so we've just talked to the staff about their involvement, but if councillors would like us to talk to them about that, we can certainly come back to council with that conversation when we talk to.
I think that might be useful.
Happy with that one?
So those additional.
Those additions, who would like to move that? Lyndall, seconded by Eric. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Okay, the next was water safety, who didn't manage to present on the day, but we still have.
I'll move that recommendation.
Mr. Chairman, they talk about the Maori drowning toll in the region, which as far as I know is zero. So I think this is just a generic things there, but it's just sort of strikes me as slightly patronising. It's a way of saying that Maori have an issue with drowning, and certainly not down here. It should be a needs-based and race-based response to water safety issues. There's probably 3 drownings in South the past year.
So we're really getting a generic response that's gone to probably most councils.
I presume that's what goes to all regions, but it's just.
Eric.
Oh, I was going to say, I think this is probably a submission that's gone to every regional council long-term plan, as did the one that thought we had to deal with wallabies.
And then I see they shot one just last week
Where?
in Otago.
That's not us.
Oh, no, I know, but you know,
It was on its way down.
that was me, Jeremy.
There's one run over on the road at Chimble Creek.
I'm happy to remove that water safety recommendation, Mr.
You
Chairman.
moving with Neville, did you want to make a comment?
I'll just say, Chairman, one or two of the submissions that we had, and this is one of them, were actually outside our purview. We're outside of our ability to change anything.
Yep.
So I think we just noted, and without having to go into a deep discussion about water safety.
You happy to second? All in favour say aye.
So this is.
16.
Yes, so 16 raises issues relating to the EU process, and these are raised in a number of submissions. So perhaps Rachel can speak to the process as we understand it that's been proposed in relation to the EU decision making this time.
Thank you. I just have a slide here which shows the funding that's been allocated over the current long-term plan to date for biodiversity projects, and you can see the list there and how much they've got over that 3-year period. We're still getting invoices in, so that's not the final figure, but the amount that has been allocated is in the order of 180,000 to date, and the breakdown's shown. So going forward and in the development of the work programs for the next LGP, we were looking at whether there is a better way of doing this. Sometimes we get requests that come in outside of long-term planning processes. There is the existing Environmental Enhancement Fund, which is utilised for something, but other things have been funded directly out of the LGP. And the proposal going forward is that everyone comes through the contestable fund. Staff have been working on a set of criteria for that, or revised criteria for the fund, and those will be coming through to you shortly for consideration. The amount has increased that we're available to allocate, and that we've got that central government funding. So going forward, rather than the 180,000 over a 3-year period, we're looking to allocate at least 100,000 per annum, and we will have potentially more than that once the contracts with the Ministry for the Environment are signed. So just giving you a sense of what we've done previously, the proposal to move to a process where we have set criteria and everyone can be considered at one time and move forward from there. I don't know if there's any questions. Any further information you'd like?
But Lloyd and
there's two things in my mind here. One is that my understanding is that staff can go to a certain level, then it has to come to a council approval. So we just need to make that clear through that system. But the second part is, when I was listening to the submissions, was that I wanted them to be more connected than what they were. Stewart Island specifically is quite unique. There's really a occupation of land there and a roadway, but the majority of it is very similar country that's been preserved in its natural state and has recreation activities going on. So this 172 hectare, which is on the corner on the peninsula there, it's had quite a history with it, but I'd like it to be linked into some of the other work as well. So we're not just trying to pick winners, we're actually trying to pick a program of work across the island. Especially because it's actually got a limited coastline and it's an island. So if we can connect some of these together, that would help, I think, the work that we're doing. Because rats seem to go, but they don't listen to boundaries, so they go everywhere. And same with some of the pests. So if there's a way of linking, I think we would try and encourage that as well.
And I think having the potential for something during the year, and because I know one that Lloyd's probably going to mention that I was unable to fund last year and COVID overtook it, was the beach clean-up, because it was outside the thing and we had a tight budget, and I was pretty gutted we couldn't, because we had in the past and it was really important work. So I think having a vehicle, having ability, not just your annual plan of the LTP, that there is some money sitting there, I think is quite helpful. Lloyd, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Roy Thompson made some good points there, and I think he needs to be congratulated on his plan for restoring that area and opening up for school groups and walking tracks and the rest. But he did indicate that he is working with the other groups on the island as part of the ecological restoration, which his predecessors did. That was the Dancing Star Foundation, which kind of worked in isolation and nobody really knew what was going on there, but there was a completely different approach there. So I think he's doing a great job.
Mr. Neville in Lyndall.
I think Rachel probably answered my question, Chairman, that the funds should become contestable and be dealt with together. I suspect that we've been dealing with them on sort of ad hoc applications for funding and dealing with them as they come in. I'd much rather see it be dealt with on a more structured basis so that we can actually allocate the funds to get the best benefit across our problems.
Lyndall.
Mr. Chairman, just my question is really around who would be making those decisions. There are contestable funds across lots of local government authorities, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel as far as how that actually works, but most of them that I'm aware of have a mixture of community representative and council representative kind of mixtures of group in the group. But I'm just wondering what we're considering for that.
Through here, Mr Chair, the criteria, as I mentioned, are in development, and also to be feedback, the comments from the deliberations today, and those will come through to you shortly, and I understand that would be part of the mix who would make the decisions.
In the past, we've tended to do some at this stage, but we did have an environmental enhancement fund, but they still had to come through a council meeting to be approved, which I guess gives us that visibility and checks and balances. So I'm assuming we'll probably do the same with what wasn't done now. We'll also still have to come back with a staff recommendation, which gives us the visibility we've got to need. Robert.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Chairman. I just wanted to make the point, Councillor Cook talked about rationalising it, but a lot of these things come in ad hoc because that's how they come in, as different groups or farms or whatever come up with a project and then want to apply for it. It's pretty hard to look years ahead if they've become inspired for some particular reason. Our people out there on farms doing that, so we have to have that flexibility, and that's how it's worked today.
So I like feedback is. Thank you, Neville. So, that point here, just to be clear on what recommendation is on Rachel's recommendation rather than on the funding. I'm assuming that's what you're talking about.
So this is information that's been shared. It doesn't actually change the recommendation unless you would like additional information incorporated. I've already got noted down that you want to congratulate the trust on their proposals. So I've got that noted as an addition to my.
Neville.
Move the recommendation, Chairman, on the basis that we've actually received the information that we asked for during the hearings. In response to a number of applications for funding, we were told that there was a program in place to rationalise how that's done. We've been given that information now. I'm not sure that it's part of the recommendation.
So we can add
Probably
that.
part of the response to a number, actually, isn't it? That,
So we can amend that paragraph that starts additional advice will be provided to say that additional advice was provided and the nature of it, so that that's part of the recommendation.
There was reference that we were changing the system, and now we've been told.
Eric.
Yeah, the unique thing about this submission is it's from the only, at least the biggest predator-free fenced area, probably in the South Island, and certainly in Southland, and I'm just wondering if we shouldn't have a better connection about lessons and get some reporting back from them as well on any issues that come out, because there's a lot of discussion about creating these arcs of survival all over the place, and we've got this unique and big thing operating in our area, and so I mean, if we just.
So for funding, it would be good to get at least an annual report on that.
Well, yeah, I think we should ask for that and any other information they've got.
It's probably a good idea because predator-free Rekiura is continuing to move forward.
Yeah, well, this is a wee subset of that where they've got their predator-free fence and. Yeah.
Note that and ask that of them.
I think that's standard anyway. I think we asked for that.
Do we? Okay.
And we have had, Kari came in once and did quite an extensive presentation on the project.
I wasn't here.
No. In terms of the recommendations, I think we can.
All right.
Because they're not germane to the decisions of the options and the LTP we could adopt.
So we had a motion from Neville. Have we had a second for that? But in this case, we can probably adopt the recommendation as well because it's not on the final figures.
It doesn't relate to the three options.
We're happy with that, and then mover and second, with Lloyd seconding. All in favour say aye. Aye. And the next, which is River Mystery, page 18.
We recommendation too, Chair. I think the staff response there is quite good. We've got an ongoing relationship with Invercargill City to deal with issues of the estuary. Our own programs.
Can I just respond to the hearing? Sorry.
Yeah, I think part of this is that the work is not publicly seen that is going on. And it's mentioned that there's work going on, but I don't know where it actually shows its face. So I think that's the issue here. And there's a bigger discussion happening outside of the LTP that is going on as well.
Whether ICC considers the landfill an asset is probably a moot point.
Well, ICC made mention that they are doing some work themselves in conjunction with this group. We do some work down there as well. I'd like to think that's coordinated together, and at some stage we get a better understanding of not only what is happening, but actually what we do going forward with this group, which I think I'm a part of as well, is want to do stuff, but they want to do the right stuff in the right way. So
the recommendation is pretty much along those lines, that we'll work proactively with City Council and iwi and others. Yeah. Anything further we need to add to Peter?
Just on the wording, just around discussions, does that need to be a bit stronger to convey our intent around the estuaries? Just in what I think it was, I read.
That we're in dialogue with Invercargill City.
Yeah, dialogue, I should say. Does that need to be a bit more stronger than just dialogue?
It will be accurate at its current state, I think.
Yeah. Just adding to that, perhaps, if we could receive an official report from them as to what their actions are around the refuse site would be a big help, rather than just discussions held at some point.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's part of the recommendation. So Invercargill City Council, when they went through the deliberations process, requested their staff to report back at the time of the preparation of the next annual plan on how things were advancing. And so the recommendation here is that we do the same. So we provide a report back to you as we part of preparing the annual plan.
And Mr. Chair, can I just say, you did request some more further information on the monitoring. So following the last workshop that we had on the New River Estuary, we intend to have another one. And there is further work that we can share with you at that as well. It's been going on in relation specifically to the landfill. So I'm expecting that will happen as a workshop quite soon. And also Councillor Esler, I think, still has a presentation to make of that also. It may well be at that we can look at how to perhaps invite or involve Invercargill City Council as well.
You happy with that? Would you like to move that recommendation at this? Yeah, I will leave the recommendation because it has LTP implications. We probably should leave that we can move the response.
There's no.
Or saying no change. We don't know whether there's no change is the bottom line. It's all fine by the bottom line probably.
Well, there's no change to the draft long-term plan submission, I think.
Oh, okay. So we can. Moved by Alan, seconded by Lloyd, was it? All in favour, say aye. Aye.
Yes, it's a good point actually. I don't think that's meant. Rachel, just to confirm, when the staff recommendation is no change to the draft 2021-31 long-term plan, it means in relation to that submission as opposed to any other changes you might make,
Yeah.
just to be clear. Yeah.
Okay, we'll move to 34, Chris Henderson, Lumsden, page 20.
Chairman, under the staff report, it says, as such, it appears that there's no strong or emphatic direction from the community for any rating option. We need to bear that in mind with our discussions under rates. We've made a statement there about acceptance by the community of our rates proposals, and we're standing by that, presumably.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's a statement that appears in relation to pretty much every submission that's commented on the rating. So it's a standard response, and I think that's the one you're going to consider at the end.
Yeah.
We look at options 1 or 2.
Yes. So you wouldn't adopt the actual recommendation, simply leave.
Peter?
Yeah, just picked up on that, Christine's submission or staff recommendation around the SNA surveys. And this is probably to do with their goals around regional leadership, just written here, to understand the new requirements and where possible align resources, processes and strategies to avoid unnecessary duplication and cost. So that's a really good, that's a first step for us to look at on the moving forward around working together. District Council.
Absolutely.
Just thought I'd note that.
I know you're being picky, but under the rates one, the first sentence is fine, but then we actually give an opinion. I'm just wondering whether that's actually appropriate. We go into basically discussion about generally all the submissions and with no strong direction or empathy from the community for any rating options. Christine's given, well, Christine's given her opinion, which is the first statement, but I don't know, I'm not sure, but we consider that next part as part of their overall look.
The last sentence of that first paragraph, Chairman, supports what Lloyd is saying, that we've sort of indicated we've made a decision here.
Before we made a
In
decision.
fact, we haven't.
And also,
It's up for us to assess whether there's an overwhelming majority one way or another after we've considered all these submissions.
so Councillor,
And that one appears in a whole lot of the
Yeah.
staff recommendations.
I can suggest that we actually remove that sentence.
Yes.
And we can remove that sentence from every paragraph that it appears in.
Yep.
Because
Raise it
it's,
with me when I keep reading it.
because it's factual to that point, and then you're correct, it's an opinion. So I'm comfortable if we delete that sentence and delete it in all of the paragraphs.
And in this case, we could thank her for her support of council's recommendation, which she has.
Well, she's giving a direction of their questions.
But the rest of it doesn't need to be there.
Okay, so that speaks to whoever raised that point just before.
It needs to be, there's similar statements through some of the others, so we need to.
Well, this paragraph is repeated.
Yeah, it needs to be.
So we will remove
not.
that sentence where the paragraph exists throughout the document.
Any other changes to Christine's? If not, would somebody like to move?
I'll move, Chairman.
Neville, seconded by Lloyd, all in favour say aye. Aye. Move to Port Hill, Stewart Island Record Community Environment Trust, 22.
So this is a similar matter to the previous submitter around the EEF.
Well, it doesn't make any changes to our long-term plan, Chairman. We actually already have been supporting this group, and I would anticipate that we will continue to do so. But under the funding program that we've been talking about.
Is this one of the ones that wanted?
Recommendation as a-
I've seen that.
Moved and seconded, we're all happy with that one? Motion, all in favour say aye. Aye.
The order of Mining Guardians is submission number 12.
23 and 24 on. Any changes to the staff recommendations? Just to cover most I think.
I'd move that recommendation, Chairman.
Moved by Neville, seconded by David. All in favour say aye. Aye.
Thank you. Did you make
47, Wendy Joy Baker at Nightcaps, page 27.
Mr. Chairman, we've noted the request that we provide Ms. Baker with the information that she's seeking around air quality matters. on that matter.
So did we actually test her sample that she brought in?
I saw her delivering that to Ben McGregor, so. I don't know whether we got a response back, but we certainly took the sample from her.
Depending what's there in the past, we've always been reluctant to take a sample without knowing where it's come from, but we can still be interested.
Yes, well, I saw us take it from her, so I can follow that up for you.
That was of interest, Chairman, but it's not part of our long-term plan. Outside this discussion.
Can I just comment then, Mr. Chair, on the, the allocation of funding towards the area of year? And that's, in the current annual plan, we were spending $382,000 on our contribution towards looking at air quality, whereas in the current next 10-year plan, we are cutting that back to $296,000 next year, this first year of the plan, and only going to get close to the current level of spending by year 10 of the long-term plan. So do we have a focus on air quality, or are we not as focused on air quality as we have been?
I think we're at a stage where we're probably going to be the enforcement stage of the current plan, but I think we're still waiting for the government to move. We keep being told they're going to revise it at a national level, and that's probably holding things up. We've had talk for years about moving from PM10 to 2.5, and it still hasn't happened. Neville?
So we're required, Chairman, to comply with the government's directions on air quality, in particular airsheds where an issue has been identified. What Alan's suggesting, should we be looking at the whole province? I'd say that's out of scope and beyond our resources as well. But there are particular areas where there are issues which we are concentrating on.
Most of them are under consent conditions as well, so most of the discharges have a specific focus. This is a general focus.
But Peter, then Lyndall.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying, Neville, but I do support what Alan's saying. It's like it's going to be an emerging focus of this council. We need to be prepared for that future.
Lyndall.
Yes, actually, I'd reinforce that. We already haven't had enough staff resource to cover off the work that we've currently got, let alone when the new NESEC comes out. So I would reinforce perhaps concern that we are going to be able to fund the work that's coming at us quite soon. And with that, I'd have to ask your leave, Chairman. I'll be back as soon as I can.
Okay, Lyndall.
Thank you.
See you later on. Probably getting outside of the actual submission, but I think we probably have got the resources into the discussion for another day of whether we're actually out there on with staff or councillors actually finding out where the problems are, and because we'll put stuff out there with its education, but we know there's houses that there are devices out there that aren't complying, and if we were able to specify, knock on the door and say, look, do you realise these things are available, we might make some real progress, because we do see the loan thing is probably not that relevant anymore because you've got low interest rates and 5-year interest free for a lot of appliances, but we haven't yet. But I think that is a discussion for a workshop rather than right now. Anything further to be added to Rebecca's response?
Except we won't adopt the actual recommendation.
We'll leave the recommendation.
So the a little bit more generic. I've noticed in a couple of these you were using some acronyms that are not clearly explained. Can we make sure when we reply we actually use the full for the reader?
Yes,
full
like
written, not the acronyms.
Not abbreviations. Yeah. Good point.
Richard, the other, following on from the last discussion for the resolution, there was actually quite a list of complaints in the compliance section of the we'll deal with that in the next couple of days in the subcommittee. but we're actually notified of a number of discharges that the public sees and we follow up on a case-by-case basis. So it's not as if we're not doing anything. There is a lot of targeted work going on, which may or may not address her concerns.
Somebody like to move that recommendation?
Probably.
Seconded by Peter, moved by Lloyd, all in favour say aye. Okay, we'll move to 25, Invercargill City Council, page 29.
Covered off the rating variance adequately with other submitters.
Probably the rough boat ramp one is one of the important ones is where we are on that with and the line of recursive funding is probably very germane to extra funding there at the moment. We have put some money into the ramp, but this is the washdown facility that's the outstanding issue,
Yes.
isn't it?
So the boat ramp is still an existing project, and it's, but it needs to be scoped, and we'll be working with the city council around that, which is what's in this note. It's difficult for us to budget without knowing what the scope of this project is. So once that emerges, we'll have a conversation with the council about what that looks like in terms of future annual plans and how we might fund this. But at this stage, that's unknown. We've got quite a bit of work to do yet in that regard. So that's why there's no specific budget set aside at this moment for this washdown facility.
Have we not budgeted in a previous long-term plan for this, like $200,000?
We budgeted for the aspects that we've already spent the money on, which is
It was originally budgeted about 1.8 million, wasn't it, when I first read some report about it a couple of years ago? That the Southport was going to provide $800,000 or something, plus the land, and City Council was going to provide $500,000.
Tony might add to that, they're not clear.
Chair, I'm not familiar with the total of the project, but our contribution to the boat ramp was 400,000, which we have paid. There was a capital amount in the previous LTP, now to be ending tomorrow. A small amount of 200,000.
Neville, yeah.
As the submitter in her address said that the Bluff Museum hadn't agreed to the washdown facility being on their land, and might correct me, but I believe that we did.
I don't know if the discussion was finalised.
Through, can I jump in?
Is that right?
Hi, Rob, would you like to make a comment there?
Hi, Chair, and good morning, councillors, and apologies for lack of presence, but I'm having a few days at home. Yeah, just around the slipway and just following on from Tania, certainly our contribution is only one part of a bigger cost to that slipway. And there was all sorts of discussions about who might fund it and what it consisted of. But yeah, our contribution, I think, was 400,000, which has been paid. Tania is nodding her head. Hopefully. But as Wilma said, the slipway project is a live project, and we need to scope it up and look at what it's going to cost, and then determine what options for taking this forward, and come back to you with some proposals. So just to clarify all of it. Thank you.
No, thanks for that, Rob. So to liaise, and I don't think Dunedin have a suitable facility either, so that there may be an opportunity there too. So we're relying on the lift out thing, but there's a big waiting list at the moment, and we know probably the region, including as far north as Dunedin, does need more abilities, believe it. But that's probably as far as we can take it, that we'll continue to liaise and get. Anything else?
You just that other, from that submitter Chairman, there was some mention of the increase in resource consent deposits. I'm not sure that they appreciated that was for notified hearings, not just for ordinary applications. So anybody reading that on the surface would think we'd made a huge increase in fees, when in fact it's for consent hearings, which on average cost $10,000 to $20,000 to the applicants.
Well, I think that probably should be added to the response, to make that clear. Thanks for that, Neil. Tania.
Chair, I'd just like to clarify as well that it is a deposit. It's a contribution towards the total cost. The hearing may well end up at $25,000, in which case we're funding the difference until we're paid. The other thing is, should it not go ahead or the cost be lower, then the refund is made to the applicant. It's not a fee, it's a deposit for the total cost.
I move the recommendation.
Moved by Neville.
Yep.
Seconded by Lloyd. All in favour, say aye. Southern District Health Board of Invercargill. Any additions to staff recommendations?
PCA was next according to my Chairman. 33.
Page 32. On page 32, Southern District Health Board, beginning of their submission, and then SPCA.
I have to. I apologise.
Happy to move.
Moved by Eric. Seconded by David. All in favour, say aye.
Just a note, Mr. Chairman, on that submission by the District Health Board, linking in with issues of public health and environment, air quality, water quality and so forth. That's probably going to be becoming more emerging issues in front of us as time goes on, those connections. Just want to make a comment on that.
And with the changes in Three Waters, probably going to have the Ministry of Health moving out of the water quality area that they've been reasonably relaxed about in the past. Okay, we 33 next.
We are SPCA.
SPCA.
Just a bit outside the scope of the offer.
I'll move. Happy to move. Eric's moving. Second by Neville. All in favour say aye. 245. Mr. Hodgkinson. Any additions? He was unable to attend in person, but we had his written submission.
Chairman, on the basis it doesn't actually change our long-term plan, supports a number of the things, efforts and initiatives we've already taken.
Moved by Neville, seconded by Alan, all in favour say aye. Aye. Move to 36, Forest and Bird.
All of these.
Any additions to the staff recommendations?
I know that staff are actually suggesting that we could change the level of service by creating a metric for the level of service that's associated with this submission. Just talks about an annual increase year on year, so staff are actually suggesting we put at least a base target on it, just for noting.
I was just wondering, under the climate change, but there's actually probably, it's a bigger subject than just climate change. We make one of your initial climate action plan. We need to start moving that forward too. This is during work, this is day-to-day activity, this has now become part of our usual sort of stuff. We've had a look, we've got more work to do, it's not just have a look.
And I know staff are working together across the councils, but in the near future, we probably need to set up a governance structure to go with it.
So I think we're going to have to four working on this, not just one. And I think we're past the initial. We need to, I'm not sure what you do with it, but this has become business as usual.
So which part of the staff recommendations are
Climate change, because the last sentence here is an additional work has been undertaken on initial climate action plan.
internal climate change?
Internal.
We do reference the levels of service in which we're talking about working actively with our regional partners on the climate change strategy, which is the level of service that we put in here, which reflects, I think, the conversation that you're reflecting.
Jointly developing, but it's the conversation for another day is actually moving that
It's
forward.
a detail of what that region-wide process is. I think we've had a workshop and I think there's good will to move forward on that.
Any other changes needed to that recommendation for forests and birds? If not, would somebody like to move the recommendation? I'll take Jeremy and Neville. Moved by Jeremy, second by Neville, all in favour say aye. Aye. Move to 48, which is federated farmers. Covered a bit of that already, but.
Are there any additional matters in here that we need to discuss? There was commentary from them on the Waituna Creek rate.
There was certainly one of the comments and even at land stage talking about how easy information was to find out for our long-term plan on our website. And I know from my own perspective that I did go there several times and started hunting for information, and it took me a while to find it. So I do sympathise with those who haven't had spent as much time on our website as perhaps I have. And so I think that we could do a more complete job of, or an easier job for the community to understand what we're putting up in. Because, we had multiple documents that we were updating, policies we were updating, and there were also some of the reports were truncated into different pieces rather than a single large document that gave more detail to the plan.
That's a good point. I found it difficult to get to where I needed to too, especially when something's going on. You think there'd be a good link just to go straight to it. Eric?
Sorry,
Whilst I don't recall it being in the written submission, they certainly, when speaking verbally, mentioned Christchurch coming down to something like 14%. Now, I don't know that we need to respond exactly to that, but I think somewhere in here we need to say that we're resolved to not fund operations out of debt. They are happy to consider debt for asset creation or improvement. Just as a response to that, am I in the right zone that you're saying that?
That's fine. They mentioned Christchurch, they didn't mention the West Coast or Otago.
No, I know, but the inference was made that if we took another year, we could come down to 14% like Christchurch. But the reason that Christchurch, or Canterbury it is 14% because they're funding a significant part of their operations out of debt, I understand. And I just think we should respond by saying somewhere in here, and it seems to be a fitting place to say that council does not wish to fund operations out of debt as principle, but is prepared to look at it for asset creation or improvement. Or words to that effect. Needs to be in here somewhere.
And if they want to put like the internet, like the flood bank type thing, intergenerational benefit, yeah.
Some of the shovel-ready stuff, the flood banks, whatever, yeah.
Well, we are going to be funding our operations out of debt for the next 5 years, councillor, so that's, 3, but 5 and, if it's 16%, I mean, the difference between the two options that were proposed, that went out for consultation, was the level of debt and then the length of debt, and that had an impact on the time it would take to pay it back, but also the amount as a result of that. And so the principle, you're absolutely correct, in the financial strategy was to pay for everyday costs with everyday income, which is a reflection of what is in fact in the Act, so, and a requirement. So it's prudential to go into debt in the short term, but difficult to get out the longer that you're in it. Yeah, so that principle.
We just need to cover that principle somewhere in here.
Okay, so that principle we can reiterate from the financial strategy.
And one of the other solutions, and the good thing about the Federated Farmers Submission is that they did provide 2 key solutions. One was to cut coastal activities altogether, which is pretty unpalatable since it's a large part of what we do. I can't see that happening, but the other one was to spread the debt further over a longer period of time, which inherently carries one risk for us.
Yes, that was the conversation through the workshops.
Yeah, perhaps that would be a better response that council were reluctant to leave a legacy of debt to the next generation for everyday costs. And okay, we're doing a little bit, but to do what they were saying, but also the point about the coastal plan is probably comment that we have legal obligations. Yeah. Jeremy.
I'll probably also add that coming in for a submission and indicating what we can't do, what we don't need. You need to probably indicate what we do need. And they obviously didn't want us 20%, 16%, but they looked at those views, they must have had an indication of maybe where they thought we needed to be, an interest, with percentage increase. So it's always good to get all the information if they're willing to give us options.
It was really just put off your LTP for 12 months and start again, wasn't it? Yeah. Anything further we need to add to that? There was some of it was generic with the Doug Fraser response. Anything else we need to add? We've talked about responding to not doing the coastal stuff and the debt. If not, moved by Neville, seconded by David. All in favour say aye. Aye. Do you want to have a break for?
We've got one more.
Okay.
One more from the hearings and then.
Okay, no, we'll do that, then that'll be a good chance to. So we'll move to the Reti catchment liaison group.
I'll move.
Moved by Eric. Anything else we need to add to the response?
I think the responses that we actually, regardless of this and the Wallistown one, we actually regard as part of the Reti FMU, don't we? And as such, we are linking those together because they have a common discharge, which is the estuary. So even the staff recommendation or the staff report there that we MU is, we can't separate it out to be totally isolated by itself.
The one point that did, I think, resonate with one or two of us was the airport was a Southland asset, and should the funding be, so whether we note that comment, we can't do it right now, but I did think that was a reasonable comment.
I think the difference between management of and your comment really is the capital funding of and how do we actually look after an asset that sits here for the Greater South. I think they're two different things. I don't think we can do one without the other in a day-to-day management sense.
I mean, there is a discussion to be had about how this is going to be funded once we know exactly where the funds fall.
Well, can we relate that through our reply?
So that's paragraph 2, we said that we haven't agreed on this, how we're going to do this. We want to be more explicit about that, because that conversation needs to happen.
That comes up. I think work is underway. We're actually working that through now.
Yeah, but then,
in agreement from different parties.
but council does need to agree that during, and the other thing that but at the time that we discussed the shovel ready, one of the reasons why, which, reserves and how this might be funded was discussed is because we're not certain exactly where the percentage of the cost is going to fall. So that we proposed to discuss during the next 3 years when that became clearer. So I think this is the best possible answer we can give at this point, because to demonstrate any direction of travel at this stage, which we'll need to consider maybe in 2 years' time.
And the separate meeting that Jeremy chaired probably is added a wee bit to that conversation, so it probably doesn't need to be there.
Version of that reserve held, they want to.
Parallel processes here, but see how we respond with this one now.
Well, so at this point, we really can't say anything more than this. I mean, you may want to discuss, the Lake Hawkins Reserve is a very small reserve. 130. Is it 250? No, sorry, I meant the number of people.
Oh, sorry, 132.
Yeah, 172 people.
And just add, like, it certainly is, like, we'll talk about the airport in regards to being that self an asset and just how it all fits into who looks after it and things like that, but it is in a really big catchment too. So
I feel
they
there's a
can't
conversation.
sort of take that bit out of their reading. No, we're not worried about that already, so it is part of it.
I suppose I'm just wondering whether, does that sentence make better if you take out reference to the leasehold land? Because their discussion is in here. If you basically say we haven't totally agreed yet, but we're going to do that, we're looking at all the appropriate reserves, that's probably more at a generic high level than to actually specifically get down to a leasehold reserve.
So you don't have to.
I think we need to take out reference to the leasehold reserve and look at it in more general fund appropriate reserves. And that allows us to do our work and come back with an answer.
Yeah, so that to rework that and the generic answer.
I think that would be detailed.
Okay.
Appropriate reserve. I think did Neville move that one? Somebody moved it early.
I'm happy to second that. Neville second.
I did. No, you did. It was Eric. I think it was by the way. He wanted a cup of tea, didn't he?
Apparently.
We're going to say aye, and we'll break for 10 minutes, quarter of an hour, and come back. Then we'll do the submissions that weren't heard.
Expressing support for option 2, that is the 16% rates increase in 2022 option, and comments that while that may take longer to pay off debt, he feels that would give room to increase, move to increase further down the track if required. And so that's the standard response that's there, minus that statement, and you'll obviously consider the options at the end.
Anything further to add to that one?
So I know we're going to talk about the recommendation later, but that to me would actually, I'm not sure why we've got that recommendation on that particular one for us to consider later. I would have thought that would have been 16% first choice.
Yes, well, it's like the others would take that bit out anyway at the moment, because that's a generic thing at the end. After that, any additions, subtractions?
So just for clarity for me, Chairman, how's that going to read? Because he's saying, go to 16%, and we're saying, well, we're going to go to 20. We haven't actually made that decision.
No, so the recommendation at the end,
We'll
we'll
take that out.
adopt at the
Note the
end.
submission.
Yeah, we're just noting.
No submission and leave it at that.
Yeah.
So the next submitter is the New Zealand Farm Environment
Did
Trust.
we move and second that?
I'll move it.
Moved, and Eric seconded, David, all in favour say aye.
Right.
We're good now. Move to 4, which is the environmental.
So this is noting that they're keen to maintain and enhance their partnership with the council. We've made funding available to the trust previously. At this point in time, they're not seeking additional funding, but perhaps be aware that they may seek funding at a subsequent stage. So the recommendation is to commit to continue the close working relationship with the trust.
I'll move, Chairman.
Moved by Neville, second by Lloyd, all in favour say aye. Move to 5, yes, say aye.
Chairman, that the recommendation, that one, so we note the submissions.
So actually, for all of them, all submissions will, unless council say otherwise, we'll just assume that you want to note those submissions. The next submitter has
moved and seconded, that was Neville and Jeremy, all in favour say aye. Aye. 6, weight divine.
Is that, what is contending there accurate in that under general that, what does it say? Leadership and community, half the rate take going to resilience and the community and regional leadership. Is that accurate?
Regional leadership is a big chunk of what we're putting out there.
Yeah.
It's a really part of the budget for community resilience will still be the shovel as well.
Should we be giving a breakdown of community leadership, because it is rather, some people think, oh, that's what the councillors get. Well, it's not.
I'd quite like to break
Well,
down what
I
that is.
just wonder if we need a wee bit of an explanation as to what the role of regional leadership is.
What the cup is.
Yeah, so, because it could be misconstrued.
So we can certainly point to what is in the levels of service, which explains what the breakdown of expenditure for the regional leadership is.
and it includes community resilience for you, Mr. Chair, which is all the
Shovel ready.
That's fine.
That's another one, we'll just note that the mission is and I'll move.
By Eric, second by Jeremy, all in favour say aye.
Right.
Number 7, Kieran Tanner.
I'll raise that before we presupposes a decision.
So again, so we've moved on to Kieran.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So again, this, the recommendation at the bottom would be whatever you decide, councillors, at the end of this conversation.
Just expressing support for option 1 for the Waitona proposal and a general comment about living within council's means.
And actually, in the back of those documents, the wage band things are there. It's not just the CAs. It's they can't work them out totally, but there is a reasonable amount of transparency there. So it's just probably to look on the annual report or the Lloyd.
So that it is possible for somebody to, without looking at the specific salaries, to get an idea of the overall salary bill is focused to be available.
I don't think it's there. There's sort of so many employees within a certain band, so many within, so it is there.
You can break it out quite easily into the tier 1, 2 and 3.
Yes, it's.
With that slight government addition, David.
I assume that recommendation that council makes its submission resolves to adopt option 1, that coming out of all the.
So for all of the recommendations that relate to your decision, that will be made at the end, yes?
Mover and seconder for that one. Jeremy and Peter, all in favour say aye. Move to Tim with no surname.
So answer the question straight away. If you don't supply your full name and address, do we have to consider what's the policy around that?
I think that we might have had an email address. You could say there was a way to actually communicate, but yeah.
I think submitted to provide an address in his submission.
Is he a Southlander? Do we know that?
Yes, we do, we know who it is.
I think we have a policy around acceptance.
So we know who this is.
I move we note the submission, Chairman.
Yeah, I think it's a note,
So can we not have, if we knew who it is he deliberately not put his surname in?
potentially.
It's not Sir Tim, is it just Tim?
We're pretty certain we know who this is, given who it is, so.
I think I looked at that last night and yeah, there's an email address and it. I don't think it was a me.
I'll second.
So who moved?
I did.
That was Neville, seconded by Eric, all in favour say aye.
The other.
Okay, we've got Alice McKenzie, 10. Oh no, we've got 9.
No, it's the other one.
Yeah, he's on. Moved by Jeremy. That's their additional 30,000, which will come out of their budget, so that's all good. Second for that one, right? Second by Lloyd. Move to Alice to McKenzie. Pretty much a noted one for the looks of it.
Yes.
Oh, there is, this is a perception that people have, it's probably not very realistic, that the whole of these white vehicles will charge out where one would suffice to an ordinary car would have done the job, and maybe we just need to, just bear it in mind and put that at the back of our minds that, that we can be perhaps more economical with vehicle use.
Yeah, we would look at, we're looking at hybrids and everything else, so that's, we can reply on a positive note. So
I move we note that submission, Chairman.
Moved by Neville, seconded by Lloyd, might look after that comment, so Lloyd. Let's say aye.
Aye.
Can I ask what was wrong with the ride roughshod?
Pardon?
Ride roughshod.
Well, it's an old saying, was sort of like,
Sick. That's correct, isn't it?
Yeah, it's correct, but it's just saying that that is how the submitter put it, rather than that's not how we summarised it. So presumably the word roughshod appeared in the submission.
We could remove sick and
Okay, minor point, let's move.
quote marks around it. I agree with the quotation mark.
Yeah, quotation marks.
Yeah. Matilda?
Tara Kitch.
Another one of Jeremy's.
Yeah.
They're all your friends.
A lot of people money.
Where are you going?
Thank you.
I'll have it moved if you want.
Speak to this one.
We probably want to speak to this one a bit. The 50,000's fine, but the extra FTE, I think,
So talking to Catchment, we'd quite like to look at our program of work for the next 12 months before making any decisions about staff. There's certainly we've looked at whether the staff member could be working in relation to shovel-ready, but at this stage that doesn't necessarily fit inside those budgets, so it would be better to, we think, allow Catchment to look at their requirements across this next 12-month period. So our recommendation would be to agree to the 50,000, but not to the staff member at this stage, but to reconsider that following 12 months of work.
Why would we not use the word request for both A and B? We're noting their request for and their request for. We've gone into the superlative when we endorse.
Right. Mr. Chair, there's actually a bigger discussion going on here, and we need to actually, through the annual meeting, give them feedback, which we've agreed to do, and I'm not sure that's been done yet, but that would actually help some of this discussion. This is only part of a bigger, wider discussion.
and if they were suddenly funding themselves an extra FTE at full costs, that is substantial, and I think we'd have to go, we'd need to go through another meeting once they knew the cost, and so hence I think that coming back to it next year is probably better when the 30,000 or 50,000 can come out of their budget and sort of agree to that, that's fine. But when they said we really want another man, there was no financial implications.
There's also a discussion around who owns what flood bank and where. We need to clarify that, so that follows on from who do we need to actually maintain and service them, because a lot of those flood banks are privately owned, which is not necessarily what the landowner thinks. So there is quite a bit of background before we actually had that FTE discussion.
Can I just clarify whether that and line is, and B is what we wanted to say? Is it funded from Jobs for Nature funding?
No, that's incorrect, and,
So
and
that
we
needs to come
would,
out of that.
and we're actually suggesting that we consider this for 12 months and before making any recommendation about additional staffing, so we'd like to change B.
The B was, the Jobs for Nature is the fixing up of the
Yeah,
national
it's
park.
the wrong, it was the wrong fund that was put in there. But setting that aside, we actually want to change that recommendation anyway.
So the sentence with potential for the position to be funded out of shovel-ready probably would come out.
Yes, it would, yes. And, but we are recommending that we maintain A, which is to endorse the excess of 50,000.
Yeah.
Yep.
Just, there is a couple of things in regards to all this, and no problem, but just in the background. And I did ask Jen, I haven't actually followed it up, that there was quite a discussion about whether there was actually a figure put in the meeting. And then we got an absolute bollocking from the council and the committee saying your minutes are never right. So, and that's where I asked Jen, do we actually take?
I have located the recording, I just haven't had time to listen to it, so.
It's actually because they're always jumping on saying we're doing everything wrong. But the reality is that they're actually wanting to spend more money because they see the work doing and saying, hey, this is good work. And so there's a point there saying you're not doing it, but hey, spend more money and do the work. So one just wee question in regards to the 100 grand, I just personally, system, is they, jumps from 100 grand if it's an FTE, but it's 140 including overheads, just to put one more person on just to understand that. Because you think, well, the overheads are there anyway, and you seem to be every person, just to explain the cost on that. But I'm happy to move this.
Because it was a request also for a vehicle with a person as well, so the overhead wasn't just the corporate overhead.
That wasn't at the meeting though, was it? I didn't think it was. I thought it was the 50 grand was, well, I didn't even hear the money actually, to be honest.
I wonder if we need to go back to the very first part, and we the last part of that is actually not adding value, it's actually creating confusion.
we need to stick at that high level. 50,000 I think is fine because that's part of the budget. And then the other discussion really is a discussion that we need to have after clarification. We don't need to get into that other detail. We're trying to justify something that it's not going to work.
So we could probably take most of that out and just have that we request that staff explore.
Well, we don't really comment, really.
And we don't want the people, and Jobs for Nature wants to come out of that anyway. But,
Well, you can that way.
so we're basically saying, look, staff would like to investigate over the next 12 months and come back to you with.
Yeah, the FTE requirements, yeah.
Happy with that as amended? Moved by Jeremy, seconded by Lloyd, all in favour say aye. Aye. David Connor.
Move we note the submission, Chairman.
Moved to be noted, seconded for that. Jeremy, all in favour say aye.
Just out of interest, is that a staff member?
No.
Same.
We're all thinking. Oh, I was sort of wondering.
It's a different spelling.
Good.
It's spelled differently.
Right.
Good to know these things.
For you, Mr Chairman, number 15 is another funding request, and it's that same response in terms of the new approach to funding the biodiversity.
Okay.
I'll move that recommendation, Chairman.
Seconded by moved by Neville, seconded by David, all in favour say aye. Move to John Johnson, is it? Resolution 2. Just noting, is it?
I'll move that, Chairman. Would be helpful if submitters gave their reasoning behind some of their submissions to show that they had done some analysis. You know, if you're faced with a choice, do you want a bigger rate increase or a smaller one? Of course, you've got to go for the smaller one. It would be helpful to us when we make our decision if they gave us the basis for that.
It's good to do it. You give us a problem, give us a solution too.
Neville's moved, seconded. Did I see a seconder? Lloyd Esler. All in favour say aye. Aye. 18, Katie Jones Tifton.
The submission be noted.
And there's a comment there about at the end, stop blaming COVID for everything. It's actually quite a valid comment, but we don't actually mention it in the staff recommendation. We've got it. It's a new world, so we just got to work with the framework that we're in. We can't keep blaming people. We're just got to make the best of it.
What are you doing?
Well, you'd be surprised how often it comes up with transportation and other things. Oh, it's COVID, it's this and it's that. And it's just become, we've had the.
In relation to the LTP consultation, though, we only mentioned COVID, so that's great. Just a motion?
Yeah, I know,
Mover, second for that.
Want to say we're doing bad management.
Second by Alan, all in favour say aye.
Aye.
Mr. Alistair Kilbert, page 62.
A few people actually mentioned the fees and charges schedule.
Few to actually comment on fees and charges and wanted no increase.
Oh, she commented on all of the attached policies, including great submission disclaimers. And David seeking to join the LGV.
Is this the one we just noticed as well?
Yes, I think so. I think and note that one.
There is thoroughness at reading through all their documents, all right?
I know, I'm impressed you commented on all of them.
Mover and seconded tonight, that's Ellen and Jeremy. Seconding, all in favour say aye. Is it the same one we had before?
No, that's quite different conditions.
Okay. Right. So noting, happy with option one, is supportive of our,
You went with number one.
moved by Lloyd, seconded by Eric. All in favour say aye. 31, predator-free governance group.
So Mr. Chairman, there was executive discussion about changing this recommendation.
Yeah, so this is, we'd like to provide some further feedback on. So, looking at the request for funding from the governance group for Predator Free, we have discussed this at the executive team, and we would like to make a recommendation to you that in fact you approve the funding for the next 3 years of 106,000. The reason for that is that the need for council to demonstrate a level of commitment to this project will enable us to be able to secure the funding that we're looking for. So the way that the credit-free system is set up is that government funds a certain percentage provided we come to the party with the rest of the funding. We're seeking that funding from large charitable organisations and third parties who will require our commitment in order to know that we're actually, they're giving us money for a longer term project, that we're actually committed to it. Given that this is 3 years of the next 10 years, we think that it's reasonable to agree to fund this for the next 3 years. And we certainly have funds in the biosecurity reserve to be able to do that. So our recommendation is that we agree to fund this not just for 1 year but for 3.
She asked for 5.
So again,
They asked for 5.
they've asked for 5, but our recommendation is 3.
And I think in 3 years' time, it doesn't really matter, but we'll review again in 3 years anyway. So I've got Robert, then David.
Thank you. If I could just ask, if we commit to this here, are we certain of drawing that funding in, or are we going to be left paying for it ourselves out of some funds?
We wouldn't be committing to paying any more than this, but this would sustain the project so that it can raise those funds, and it needs to work to do that. I think it will be reasonable to budget that. If there were issues with its inability to progress, then that would be an operational matter that we would be able to decide. But this is about ensuring that the budget is sitting there so that this project can continue.
Can you briefly explain a little bit more about what they're doing? So they're the ones that are starting at sort of bluff and working their way north, are they? Or how is this project being undertaken, and I guess say the resource behind it, as in volunteers, or is it paid staff, paid people?
So I'm not sure if I'm the best person to actually describe the detail of how Predator Free works, but it is we have a project manager here working on this project now, because that we are currently funding. Predator Free does have employees. I'm not sure, Rob can probably answer this question about whether some of them are also volunteers.
Yes, thanks, Wilma. You're going well. So let me add to that. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, so there's no, these are professionals. We've got a project manager on board. She'll be building a team, and we're supporting that. This is a predator-free initiative, which is a national organisation, but looking to work with regions that are prepared to front up and provide some support. So it's not volunteers, it is, I think, building from Bluff. We did have a presentation some months ago where I think Ellie and her team came in and talked about what they were doing, and the approach, and the project manager at the time, talking about it. We can certainly, arrange another presentation to go into a bit more detail, but it is working out from Bluff, I understand it, to a wider part of South.
Yeah, I think there's a second project, isn't there, as part of it, Rob?
Yeah. So this is getting significant legs around the country, and I think I'd be suggesting it's a good thing to be a part of. Some leverage, if we're using our funding as leverage, 106,000 goes, we end up quite a bit more funding comes into Southland. That's doing the right thing, killing the nasties, killing the opossums, ferrets, and stoats of rats.
Tony, would you like to add to that?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to expand on what Rob was saying about the leverage. In the shovel-ready projects, we have a 3-to-1 leverage. We produce one, the government produces 3. It's a significant amount of money coming into predator-free for a small investment on our behalf. 106 is a net amount. There's a small amount coming from the City Council. Sorry, I can't tell you if it's the GDC as well, but so 106 is our net. It's grown substantially by other funding that our staff are attracting, and then that's multiplied again by significant other parties and then the government. So it's a very small amount of money to potentially gain a lot of money to do some very important work.
And look, just following up from Tanya's comments too, there's also links, I think, towards SNA things we've heard about. So this is all part of turning biodiversity into an asset, and so links into some of our outcomes around biodiversity.
I've got David, then Peter, then Jeremy. David.
I move the recommendation, Mr. Chairman, subject to those changes that the recommendations that the staff have made. Probably jump the gun a bit, but that's what I suggest.
We'll hold that moving. So, Peter.
Yeah, just want to say more support to that anyway. There's a growing understanding of those public and private way of doing this sort of stuff. And just want to say, also with the Rakiura predator free, it's most part of their project is Bluff, because that's the landing point for the island. That has to be secured first before they go into Rakiura. So the project will be working with Rakiura too, I would imagine. And we got to a point too earlier on that this all sort of fell to pieces. It seemed to fall to pieces without the involvement of the Southern District Council. Has that been resolved? Are they on board for the long term with this now?
More than I can tell you, actually. We can check on that.
I'm not clear on that, but I think I am pretty clear though that this our proposal was going to go a long way towards providing a good basis for predator-free South to do the work. And look, the comments around Bluff are good. It's certainly the jumping off point, and there's a very strong predator-free project there that's led by Estelle Lesk, that we know well, who's on our forum. She's providing leadership in that space, and so it links in with that project.
Jeremy.
Yeah, no, I was just going to ask Tony. So it's just comes out of the surplus for this next year. Obviously fitted within their budget. Is that correct?
Biosecurity have a reserve of 700,000 odd. They have a small surplus this year from underspend in some areas that they weren't able to complete or chose not to complete. So I'm suggesting that we fund the first 3 years till the next LTP from their surplus.
Second David's.
Moved by David, seconded by Neville. Thank you. Further discussion? I will put that motion. All in favour will say aye. Aye. Welcome back, Lyndall. Seashore, Te Anau.
Move that we note the submission.
Mr. Chairman, he has got a comment that he guesses we won't listen. Maybe in our response, we could say, well, we have read and considered your submission, rather than just saying, thanks for voting it. Thanks for submitting. Maybe he needs a response that reassures him that his opinion was listened to.
Add that, I think.
Yes, I think that's, I agree. I think we've there's a number of comments that have come up through the day that I think we can include in this commentary too about rationale, so that he feels listened to also.
Moved by Eric, seconded with that one. Lord Esler, all in favour say aye. Okay, we've got 22A, Environment, Health and Services budget.
Right, so this is a submission from potentially myself, I think, to say that when the level of service document was pulled together from its component parts and printed, that one page of it was omitted, and that page has been added into the appendices in law that accompany this, and relates to a level of service in the regional leadership space in relation to IT innovation.
Speak to your submission.
Pretty
Earlier on. 5 minutes and 5 minutes for questions.
Right. So it's on page 204 of your appendices, if you happen to be carrying your appendices with you.
Do we just note, we need to do more than just noting, I think we just need to accept or something, we just need to.
Yes, because it means that you adopted all the documents without seeing this page. Which matters because it is the performance measures around our data and the innovation in our data services.
Mr. Chair, on page 67, the recommendations to accept the submission and correct the levels of service.
I'll move it.
Seconded.
Moved and seconded, moved by Lloyd, seconded by Eric, all in favour say aye. Page 24, come across the Wakatula.
Move we note that, Mr. Chairman.
Moved by Neville, seconded by Jeremy. All in favour say aye. Aye. 27, Real Journeys Limited.
Is that our responsibility, the communications thing that's mentioned there? Is that something we have a responsibility for?
Partially, but Neville, you might be.
I'm a member of the HF Users Fishermen's Radio Committee. Environment South and contributes to the repeater stations for that radio network around Fiordland and the South Coast. So we do have in our harbour master has a budget.
Are we the sole,
marine
are we
safety?
the sole funder of that?
No,
We're not.
for marine safety. The organisation is funded by its members to a large extent.
And are there some blemishes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, some need to improve the service? Is there a risk involved there? Or?
There's a risk to marine activities around the Fiordland and the South Coast if we don't have a good radio network. It's pretty, I think there's only one new repeater station being planned at the moment, but we need to upgrade one of the ones down at Busica.
So there is a need for some capital expenditure?
Yes.
Right, thank you.
And the Harbour Master has a budget already, so I imagine that's part of our long-term plan.
That's in regard to our coastal activity, especially around cruise ships when that starts up again with
well, it's not aimed at cruise ships as such. They use the service, but it's more about the commercial and recreational people. Big numbers down there now using the area.
But we right down to resolution on it now, it's just north of that to north of.
Well, we've got,
There's the gap.
then we've got a pretty much complete coverage now, but I think there's one more site being considered. But each time you service a site, it's a helicopter flight there and back. And if the weather's bad when you get there, it's a flight there and back, and then another flight there and back.
We had one to go up last year and I was offered a seat, but I didn't have time, I had other meetings unfortunately, it would have been a good flight. So, but in that part of the world, yeah, weather conditions can knock these things around. And, Lloyd, do you have a...
Yeah, I just wonder, Mr. do we need to make the report that while historically may have been funded from the marine fee, this work's going to carry on regardless of the marine fee? That this is bigger than the marine fee income stream?
So there is, we commented on where the budget does still have, the work still there, and the Mildred Harbour Control, which is where they ask for confirmation, we can confirm that that is still in the budget.
So I think we need to make that point, to basically counter their discussion that.
So that's the last paragraph, that was the discussion around that particular point, was the question they raised about funding.
been included in... Anything further on real journey submission?
I'll move you note that submission, Chairman.
I'll second it, but I think we may need to put in there that we have a lot of positive feedback from that service, and it's been a worthwhile service, and we want to keep it up and going. I think we need a little bit of positive going back, I think.
Okay, we'll move to second, all in favour say aye. Aye. Right, we'll move to 28, Mr. J. Bray, nightcaps.
I'll move we just note the submission, Mr. Chairman.
Moved by Lloyd, submission is noted, seconded by Lyndall, all in favour say aye. Aye. Not to do with the LTP, but must follow up with staff because I've had a number of complaints about
A name, an address, a contact for 29.
We have an address at least, it's not far from a dairy farm, Evelyn Farm. And when the wind blows the wrong way, it's something I have tried.
They haven't signed it.
We haven't addressed for submitted 29.
So you are able to reply.
We can reply to them, as we said we would.
I'm pretty reluctant
Follow up with
to
them.
see them if they don't put their name on it.
No, we have an email, we have a phone number and an address.
But no name.
Yep, no, we have, no, that name, we know who they are, I think.
We need to tighten that up for the future, that's just my view.
Yeah, so.
I'm
It isn't a-
reluctant to accept it without a name, but I'm not sure what standing orders say.
But they have provided an address and a telephone number. So it's not a completely anonymous. I suggest, because it's coming through the website, this address, that perhaps they just filled out the field out.
Their surname is stated.
No.
First name not, surname stated.
Maybe in the future we make
Sorry, so
sure.
what are we doing here? What are we doing today?
That's restriction.
Well, I think we're just noting, but I'm making a note to myself to follow up with staff about the AD.
Maybe in the future we make sure that that pathway is very clear for them to provide their name.
So, sure, just on that matter as to whether I mean, Jen might be able to provide advice, it doesn't matter if people provide
A little bit of
advice.
homework on
I
that
don't
before.
believe they're obliged to
No, I don't think
put
so
their
either.
name to the papers. If they don't wish to have their name in the public, they may not wish to,
I
and
don't
all
think-
our papers are published.
I don't think they're obliged at all, but they have
Obliged to.
provided, they're certainly not, it's not just some random thing, they provided their contact details, so. Okay, do we have a,
Do we move to second that?
do we have a second vote?
Be noted.
Well, no.
would like
recommendation is not.
to
I'm not,
For voting, so.
No,
lapses,
Pardon?
if there's no movement seconded, the lapses.
I'll move.
Oh, and I will second it. All in favour will say aye.
Aye.
I suspect I know who this person is, and I will have a chat to them.
Pop your telephone number into the phone.
Can we get some clarification for the future? I think you had the right, I could be wrong, you had the right to put in a submission anonymously, but you need to have some other contact details.
Yeah.
Which have been provided.
Which we have, which is why I think
If
it's fine.
if that is the case, then that's to be taken as it
You know,
is
they're a real
stated.
person.
But for privacy reasons, some people don't want to put their name in the public arena.
That's correct.
And I think that's where we're struggling with the fact, is that correct or not?
We'll, follow up on that matter.
Okay, we'll move to 30, Otago Rescue Helicopter Trust.
move we note.
Submission. Second for that one. David, all in favour will say aye. Aye. We'll move to 35, Andrew Gunn and Vicargill.
Move we note the submission.
Eric's moved we note, second for that one. Lyndall, all in favour will say aye. Move to 37, Sarah Thorne.
You encourage her.
Also noting, is it?
I move we note that, Mr. Chairman. Put some thought into.
Moved by Neville, seconded by Lyndall. They will say aye. Move to 39, Heritage New Zealand. Happy with the staff recommendations?
Sites on the coast, isn't it?
Moved by Lyndall, seconded by Neville. All in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Right, 42, Mr S.D. Payne review.
Quite moderate for Doug.
Move we note.
Oh, is this a conspiracy one? Okay, yeah, I think. We move the recommendation, we note. Seconded by David, all in favour say aye. Number 39, Heritage New Zealand, no, we've done that one.
43.
43. Okay. Andy Booth Drummond.
Move we note.
We note submission. Second for that one. Second by Ellen. All in favour say aye.
North South Tourism.
44, Milford South Tourism Limited.
So this was
Something
a,
about the walls and that, is that answered?
so their submission was primarily to ensure that they still have their funding. And we can confirm that they do, it is in the budget. And that's for the harbour controller. Well, there were other aspects in that, but they were also very consent to know, just to be clear that the funding was there actually needed.
So is that something that was funded from the income from marine fees?
Yes, so there are projects that were funded from the income from marine fee that we are still funding, which includes the harbour master and some of the projects, and this is one of them. This is part of the harbour master's budget. So, Rachel, I think I can confirm is this the group that we actually responded to and not?
So after they lodged their submission, they had some further contact with us to check that their
That
fund was
was it,
still
we've already-
available.
Yeah, we've already conveyed that information to this respondent, haven't we? Yeah.
Moved by Lyndall, seconded by Jeremy. All in favour, say aye. Mr. Ariel Johnson Gould.
What's our policy on late submissions, Chair?
You've accepted.
They're accepted.
You have on your.
There was two.
Two to accept them at the last.
We took them on.
Oh, well, we're nice people. Let's just get them.
I move we note that submission, Chair.
Moved by Neville that we note the submission. Second for that we note. Peter, all in favour, say aye. So 49, is it? This is a deep report. Reasonably straightforward, isn't it? So we'd like to move to note.
Move we note.
Moved by Lloyd, seconded by Robert. All in favour, say aye. Right, that's done.
So to the substantive matters of the consider consultation. So, Mr. Chair, we need to return to the matters for,
Page 4. Put A and B. I guess now we come back to that earlier discussion about levels of comfort with the recommendations, which is the annual uniform charge and the recommended 20%. One or two that may want to debate any slight changes, or are we happy to go with the staff recommendation?
so Rachel, would you like to just speak to the rating option breakdown?
This is the graph that was included in the agenda for the 23rd, which just showed for the two key issues the breakdown of responses. So what that particular pie chart is showing that 56% of people didn't comment directly on the different options, and then you can see the breakdown from there. I'm sure you can everyone read that.
So it's 56% of the submissions,
That's right.
So if they didn't like either one or the other, that said you charge them too much, where were they included? Were they included in the 56 who didn't give us a number, either option 1 or 2, or did we put them in?
Some did suggest alternatives, and they are included. So you'll see that a couple of those last ones talked about a 5% rate increase instead, so they put in the other, and then no responses if they didn't comment specifically. I'd need to check actually Ken crafted up that particular pie chart. Ken, are you able to offer, if you're there, any other comment about where people were put?
Now, the ones that Alan's talking about, the folk who suggested alternative options, were all put under other. So if it was clear that the submission did not make any comment at all about rates, then they went into that larger group. So any alternative solutions were under other. The 16s were clear on their own, the 20s were clear on their own. And then if there was no comment at all, they went into that larger block. Does that help, Alan?
Yeah, no, it does, thank you. So it's 20% said for if they wanted the option 1, 24% said they didn't want option 1, and 56% didn't give us an indication, and a lot of those were non-entity, or they were entity bodies rather than individuals.
Yes, so the majority of submissions were silent on rating options.
Which is not so surprising considering some of them wouldn't, well, they're not individuals paying the bill, they would be other
corporate entities. Yep.
I've got Lloyd, then Neville.
Ian, could you just check, because my calculation tells me that out of the 50, 41 are either 20% or, there was 7 that basically said 16. There was 7 of those and they were all in the non-herd. Then there was 2, one was 3 to 5 and one was 10 times 3 plus 5. Well, that tells me there's 82% of the numbers that come in actually basically supported the 20%, 14% supported a 16 option, and 4% supported something else. Oh, okay, so there's 50 submissions, right? There was 7 that said 16%. There was 2 that said were other numbers, so one of those was 10 times 3 plus 5 over a 10-year period, and one was 3 to 5% rate increase. So there was 2 that were quite outside of the options that we gave.
The 2 federated farmers ones would give you the extra.
The numbers that I've got.
Federated farmers and Doug Fraser would be the other 2 that were unspecific.
Yeah, but my point is there was, regardless of what they indicated, which is the biggest square up there, was actually 7 submissions that deliberately said a number of 16, which is option 2.
Yes, so based on the numbers I had for that, the basis for that table. So for option 1, there were 10 submissions. For option 2, there were 7. For other, there were 5. And there were 29 who were silent.
Thanks for that, Ken. Clear as mud. Neville.
Thank you, Chairman. I actually expected a stronger response from submitters around the rates that we were proposing. But as I come back to what I said before, that I would have valued reasoned, logical explanation for the preferences that were put forward. Just saying I don't want a 16% rate increase, or I don't want any rate increase at all, doesn't actually help us make a decision. And I just go back to say that we spent a long time, a lot of years at this table considering the various options and the reasons for them. And that's when we went out for consultation with a suggestion asking for opinions about whether we want a 16% or 20%. And I think we need to make a logical decision based on the facts that we have in front of us. And listening to submissions, the submissions would have held more weight if they had applied some thought to them. Some of them did, but most of them just made a bold statement, which doesn't actually help us much at all. So I think we've got the facts in front of us. We've done the homework. I don't see any barrier to actually arriving at some sort of a decision.
Jeremy.
I just want to ask, did the feds end up in the other? Were they one of the 5?
They'll be the 5 and the other.
They didn't make an alternative suggestion at all. They just said they didn't want either of them.
Against
That
it.
would be
They were against.
I'm just saying
one
they're
and
against
two.
it, so.
They will be in five.
Over in the five. And just to clarify, you've got 51 there on your, is it 28? Must be 28. Ken, he said 29. There's only 50 submissions. Wasn't there?
Yeah, the one that was missing was the staff, staff submission.
Because we were 22A.
I was wondering what the extra one was.
We snuck it as a sum number, 22A. So.
You probably should have gone in.
You've got a position on that, Ken. There you go.
Right.
Well, look, I see, similar to many of you, I was surprised we didn't have more that came in strongly against the 20%. And I'm pretty hopeful that they looked at the loss of the cruise ship money, probably looked at what's happening elsewhere, don't like it, but like most of you, I thought there would be more saying no, don't go to anywhere near 20. On that basis, I still think we should be either 20 or only very slightly below it. That's my opinion, but it is probably getting towards crunch time. Lyndall, then Alan.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd have to say I was fully prepared to be negotiating a compromise, really, because I thought that given the opportunity to have their say, more people would have had their say. So likewise, I'm a bit surprised. So on that basis, that I feel quite strongly that people who do submit often feel like we don't take any notice of their submission. But actually, we know that we do. And I think Neville's point about the amount of effort and understanding that we've gained through this process means that we have gone into it with our eyes open and as fully informed as we could be. The fact that I was, willing to kind of find some medium ground, I haven't had enough persuasion to find middle ground at this point. So either the 16 or the 20, not somewhere in between. I don't think we've had enough persuasion to alter that approach.
Thanks, Lyndall. Alan, then Lloyd.
So first point, I guess, is looking at the submissions and understanding the voice that comes behind it. And again, okay, cards on the table, like I was the president of Federated Farmers, so I know that organisation represents a lot of farmers. It doesn't represent every farmer, but it represents a lot of farmers. Two of them came along today on the submission date to say their piece. There's an executive of 10 to 15 people who read through that submission, who would have signed their name to that position had they thought, even they would have photocopied it 15 times and signed their name to it, if they thought that would have meant there was more voice behind that one submission. When we rate one submission against one individual, it's very difficult. The same point goes for Forest and Bird. Forest and Bird put in a submission, we just see that as one submitter. Is it quite the same? And I'll probably argue it's not quite the same. The impact on the rate rise is going to hit those who are in the farming sector higher than Forest and Bird members, and I don't know how. I don't think they are quite the same. But I know this whole issue over pro forma submissions is never quite resolved. If we get bombarded with them, we tend to put them all aside and count them as one. But there's a lot of voice there behind. So I think there is a bit of voice there saying that there's pushback on 20, and as a way of recognising that, I think 16 is a better number to go for. And I think we would also be worthy to look at how we fund some of the other capital costs that we have talked about. We've talked about shovel ready, we've talked about regional software holdings, that there's quite a level of requirement to fund those. We are going into the local government funding agency. It's not unreasonable to fund that over a 10-year period. I'm not quite sure when we built the banks the first time, how long it took us to repay some of that debt. But a 10-year loan, or amortise that funding over a 10-year period, and okay, we have debt for 10 years, but it's known what we're spending it on. It's not so we're funding our deficit. The loss of the cruise ship shows up in the funding statements with effectively a deficit in their funding impact statement of, in the first year it's $1 million, in the next year it's 940,000, and the next year it's 720,000, and then it stops, and then it gains credit again. It builds. So over a 10-year period, it's probably it's not in deficit, but it's always been in a credit situation, but the credit will be consumed within a year's time, I think. So how do we fund that cruise ship loss? How do we fund coast and marine? And I feel that area should be funded more, but from the community, and it's justified in putting up the UAGC from 22% maybe to something like 25%, to be reviewed in the end of 3 years once we know where cruise ship is. If it's returned like we're hoping, we could revert back to 22% for funding the UAGC. But I feel it's reasonable to ask all of the community to fund that shortfall, not just those who have high capital value.
Lloyd, then Jeremy, yeah. Have we done you, Lloyd, or not?
Mr. Chair, I was probably going to, with your acceptance, actually put a motion on the table that we go for a 20% rate increase, as was the indication of the council earlier on. The reason I do that is I think we need to have a resolution that we're talking to. If that fails, then we can pick up what the other options would be that council would consider. So I'm looking to your leave, and I'm wondering whether we should put council, what I understand was council's position going into this program on the table, and then go around and go through a process of formally giving views or commentary to that resolution. That's if there is a seconder. So.
Well, as a seconder, I'm happy to accept that motion, and we can debate that. So,
just a point of order that discussion wasn't a full council discussion to choose 20 over 16 for methods, because there were at least 2 to 3 other councillors who weren't in the room on that occasion.
So we have a motion, but we've now got Jeremy.
It's been a good process, and I appreciate it. We spend a lot of time on rates and UAGC. I do feel uncomfortable going to 20%. I do hear what Alan's position on some of his comments in regards to numbers, bits and pieces out in the ratepayers. I do feel that time will tell whether our books are in a better shape and how that reflects in the next year. I'm confident. I'm not confident, but if a gambling man I am, I'll put the dollar on that things will be a bit better, and I think things might change around. So, and that's where I'm a bit against. I'm more love to hear a 12 rather than a 16, but I'm against a 20, because once it gets up there, it won't come down again. You get a little bit of compounding effect when you get there. I think there's enough unknown out there to be more cautious in regards to getting up to 20%. So I mean, I'd support a 16, even coming from a lower point of view. All those things in mind. Yeah, that's where I would be standing in regards to this. So I wouldn't support 20%.
Thank you, Jeremy. The chairman's had to hop out. I've stopped into the chair. I'm not sure what his list is, so could I have indications, please? Peter? Anybody else? then David, then, hang on, David, Eric, and then Alan. So, we'll go to you, Peter. Yeah, the motion's on the floor for 20%, but I would like to, further discuss what Alan's talked about. And is there an option, because we talked about this disruption, and we always talk about COVID, what it's done, but I'm more concerned not what it has done, but what it is going to do. So if we want to retain, if there's a possibility to retain some sort of flexibility, keep that buffer, understand that, but then going forward, is there an option around using the general fund around UAGC, around making some amendments later on, if we find that yes, things are going well, our investments are tracking along stronger, and the community sees that that buffer is growing larger, and then we start to get the massive pushback on why did you settle on that 20%. So is there a mechanism there? It's just an idea that Alan just put out there. It's just maybe that needs exploring.
Do you want to take over, Chair? I'll better skip back up there.
Sorry, that's not a definitive answer, but.
And look, I guess.
Peter, David, Eric, Alan.
And also got Robert, so I go first. So that's.
Is there anything
Pardon?
Is there anything you want somebody to follow up with?
No, I'm all good. And I guess you're just answering your question, Peter. My bigger concern is us sticking to our pledge that next year will be 5%, and that'll still be difficult. And that's probably why I'm favouring the higher rate. We've basically gone out saying this is a reset. If we go too far the other way, because there's always other things come up, and hopefully some of those things we're talking about, the balance sheet's better, that'll help that, because the 5% is always going to be a bit under pressure. And where else? I think I always had.
Robert was in that list, and so was
Robert was probably waiting patiently. You've done it, but
I'm a wee bit concerned about the direction that we've taken. I support the statement that you just made, and thinking back to the workshop that we've done on this, and where I believe we sat on the situation, looking at the general public, and I mean, when we look at this breakdown here, it's not a large body of, it's not a lot of numbers. It doesn't seem sound enough to base on that, but the fact that there hasn't been an outcry from the population, from the people of Southland, really is telling. I can't see from those things any reason to change tack. Lately, there's been some sort of a fight back, led somewhat by Federated Farmers, I might say, and for Alan, ex-Federated Farmers president, to be submitting so strongly on this. I'm a little bit concerned that we're being somewhat derailed by the way the discussion's going. I think that we should hold to the position that we came to loosely earlier on, and there's no need for any significant change. So I certainly support what you put into the 20 with the follow-ups with the 5s.
I think we've had Peter at the top of the page, so it's David.
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, I agree with where Alan and Chairman were coming from, but I think we've got I still think there's a major issue with the UAGC. I think in the future we're going to have to look at that. It is, and forget about percentages, I mean, it's actually a cost. And that area, as it is now, it can't really change. Into the future, we definitely have to look at that. Because if you look at the in dollar terms, it's actually quite unfair, actually, on parts of the community. So, I mean, I'd love to say 16%, but I think we haven't had a clear indication. I mean, if you look at what's up there in front of us, it's pretty much 24% to 20%. Hasn't been a huge response back from the community. In fact, I haven't even had a phone call regards to where things are going. See that as not being of value, I'm not sure, but no, I do see where the other two are coming, both Alan and
Jeremy to, and I'd prefer 16, if that was the case. Thank you.
I think it was Lyndall or where?
Here.
It's Eric.
Okay, well, thank you, and there's three bills I really hate paying, and rates is one of them. I'll go into the other two. So that's kind of my measure, you know, is just justifying rates and how the whole thing works and stuff coming down from government, and there's a whole lot of things that I'm just unhappy about, rates about. But we did 17 hard days, heavy lifting, working out what we wanted. And I've had one person only say to me, what are you on about with the 20%? And when I gave some explanations, they kind of accepted that. I've only had one. The fact that we only got 50 responses across the line is, I think, a significant thing. There certainly is an outcry. There isn't an outcry against the 20%. I'll take Alan's point about collective versus individual, but there's also another factor, which is the substance of what is being said in the submission. And to that extent, and I've already mentioned it earlier in the day, that I was somewhat disappointed in some of the collective views and the accuracy with which they were promoting their cause. So I'm 20%, but by golly, I'll be hard on 5 next year. I really will be hard on 5 as our next year if we accept the 20%.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah. Alan.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So just looking at what the difference between 20 and 16 means, we're largely 1%, 200,000.
Yeah.
So 4%, 800,000.
Can I expand on that to help councillors? One, in the past, we've looked at this as Councillor Baird is, 1% equals so many $100,000, but I'd like to take us back to the 10-year financial strategy and look at this both in the 3 years and the 10 years. 16% option, which was proposed versus the 20%, at the end of 10 years, the difference in reserves or resilience will be $9.5 million between the 20% option and the 16% option. That's not a number that we published. What we published and we focused on was peak debt and how long it would take to pay off. So there was 3 years difference between paying the debt off between the 16 and the 20. But in that 3 years, we were programmed to have built up resilience of $9.5 million more with the 20% rate increase. Did that help?
So we're not too dissimilar with the thinking though that 1% is still too, so it's upwards of $800,000 a difference between year one and between the 16 and 20.
Year one, 760,000.
760,000. Okay, apologies. Right. Yep. So fractionally 800,000, but so over a 10-year period, that's in excess of $8 million, but probably more if it's compounding.
Compounding effect is $9.5 million.
Yeah. Looking at the prospective financial statements, that I know we've talked about that earlier. It's more complicated to write because of shovel ready and jobs for nature, but that's the reality. It's part of our business. It's how we are running the region. The operating surplus, as I said earlier, is $7 million projected for 2022. 1.4 million for the following year, a small deficit of 450 the following year. And then the surpluses grow. At the end of that, we're looking at $4 million. So quite substantial, not insignificant. And if you took out 800,000 a year, we would still be in surplus and would be still in a substantial surplus. So I feel, in light of also that we are going to come into this period in a stronger position, that I don't think the community needs to be paying again. They're already paying in some respects through what the government's doing for us. Do they need to be paying again?
Mr. Chair, can I make a comment
Yep.
about this? so councillors, I just want to be really clear that this is not just about discussing the loss of the marine fee. This is about the amount of work that's coming to us to do that is additional. And in the workshops, you may recall that we discussed the increase in the budget based on a range of known matters that were coming to us from central government and the expansion of our work, and also the need for us to actually update our IT systems and bring them up to date, and then to actually advance those to provide a better experience and to improve the efficiencies of working with our compliance and consents areas. So it's not just about predicting what we think future income might be. It's about the knowledge that we have of the increase in the work programs that are coming to us. And our budget conversations with you, were around the MPSFM. But there is also, since our conversations, a lot more work that we know that we're actually going to have to face in relation to the RMA, the work that we're going to have to do for the National Policy Statement for Indigenous Biodiversity, in relation to the NES for Air when that arrives, which you've also raised today, which we've not been able to scope because we don't have all the detail of that. So we do know that our work program is expanding, it's not decreasing. We also need to be able to budget, going back to the financial strategy, with what we know, which is what the certainty of our income is, which we really need to be using in order to actually pay for our everyday expenses. So we need to be able to manage that in the next 3 years, which is the envelope for this LTP, but was a look, yes, to the next 10. I would encourage you to remember that conversation is actually the basis of our request for the additional funding. And that was based on the capacity for this organisation to actually create efficiencies. So the $2 million that Tanya mentioned was likely to be the surplus this year is the efficiency that we actually based our calculation of the requirement from 20% on.
Thanks, Wilma. Jeremy.
Yeah, actually just put up the reserves, in regards to the reserves that we're building up. What's the figure of $9.5 million?
The difference between the options would amount to $9.5 million at the end.
But we're putting money away in the reserves, aren't we, though? Some of the ratings, is that correct? Surpluses.
The general reserves, we're rebuilding general reserves. We have in the last 3 years run those general reserves down.
So the idea that there is money there, and there's obviously a discussion, I might have mentioned that this to Tanya, in regards to the reserves, what are the reserves for, and in regard to, obviously it's saying, well, they're there for the rainy day, and we need the money there if we need it, but we do, signing up to local government funding, we have those ability to get our money tomorrow if we want it. So there is a discussion around why are we building up, having two funds, two sources of money if we need it. And I do feel that, and getting my head around local government funding is that we probably don't need, we're taking money out of the community to have a pot full of money when at the end of the day the government's sitting there saying, well, it's here anyway if you need it tomorrow for a disaster or whatever. So we are sort of doubling up, from my position, doubling up in regards to what we're taking out of the community. So I'm just challenging, I'm just saying that's sort of thought about this for a wee bit. Whether I'm right or not, it's up for discussion. So that's another reason why I said I don't think the number, we need to look at the numbers, and I think the numbers will maybe be a little bit think, but we do different ways of finance.
Lyndall, you want to indicate?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm struggling to put my thoughts in order, so excuse me if they come out in a random, order. The first thing is that actually I attended a webinar with from the Office of the Auditor General recently, and the most useful piece of advice that came out of it was to ask myself, would I spend this money if it was my own home budget? And And the Scottish Presbyterian in me says, no, I wouldn't. But actually, the other part of that conversation is the word that I've written down the most this morning is compound, the compounding effect of just about everything. So on one hand, we have the compounding costs to our ratepayers, but on the other hand, that affects the compounding resilience that our organisation can establish and maintain. We've had, interestingly, the large proportion of the submissions have been requests for funding. So people are coming to us for assistance. And on one hand, and wanting us to do more within our own work program, plus give them funding assistance, and also not increase their rates. So that doesn't all fit together. But I think we have to, I just wanted to draw your attention to the fact that a lot of those submissions, as you have all pointed out, were actually groups seeking assistance from us in some way, shape or form. So the compounding of all those things also means that our risk is compounding. And that's, as I said earlier, that 5 to 10 year overview so that we are able to meet some of the challenges that we won't see coming. We didn't see COVID coming, as well as the ones that we do see coming. It would be remiss of me at home in my own budget to not make sure that I had funding to keep one of my children alive and the other one educated and with a roof over their head and food to eat. So I would spend that money if it was my own. To ensure that I was able to have a resilient family, and this is another family of mine, as is the community. So I would absolutely support the 20%, so that we have acknowledged the risks that we all face, and I know that includes some people's ability to pay rates, but I still think that's the most sensible option. Thanks.
Anything further? I'll speak myself, but Lloyd?
I was going to move the motion put, Mr. Chairman, because I believe that meets the criteria for that.
Right, on that basis, I'm just going to finish off and say, look, I would never have thought when I come on this council I would be supporting a 20% rise. But with the information we've had put before us and that compounding effect, if you took this option, went to the 16%, 9.5 million, and further in debt after 10 years, yeah, we can use borrowing, but would we use borrowing for anything that wasn't intergenerational? It's the old story when you start doing your day-to-day thing, you're creating legacy for somebody else, which this has been a difficult LTP, but it is a time for leadership. So on that note, I will put the motion that that it remains at 20%. All in favour, we'll do a show of hands, I think. All in favour of the motion will raise their hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Against? The ayes have it, quite substantially. I know that's been difficult for everybody, but we've thoroughly debated the options. The rating system is not perfect, but I think we can be proud of where we got to. People won't like it, but actually, this is strong leadership. It's actually saying we need this amount of money, and I echo what Eric says. Next year, we've got to be true to our word on the.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We just need your direction on the next matter, which is the Waituna.
Okay, we've heard the submissions on Waituna. It was flat rate, other than one or two just said to hint to it at all. The majority appeared to be on the flat rate, which is consistent with what they did the last time when we did works there. Neville.
I move that we adopt option one, Chairman, and it seems to have some community support.
Mover,
I'll second that, but Chair, can I just say that what is my area down here, the option is what people regard as the most fair option is a per hectare basis. It doesn't seem any other option is hard to and difficult to for people to get their head around, and especially differentials and A to E and all those sorts of things. So the feedback I have on the ground from down there, for your information, not to sway you, but for information, is that the per hectare is the best. There is a small amount of opposition to that, but you'll always get that anyway. But this has been put together through a number of workshops for the community to address a number of issues they see, and the underlying effect there is to stop sedimentation getting into the lagoon. That's the reason I want to look after the banks and maintain the banks down there on the waterway.
Mover and seconder, any other discussion on the flat rate for Waitara? If not, I will put the motion. All in favour will say aye. Aye. Against, no. Carried.
So in regard to the report, we're just requiring the construction management care, the long-term plan, and several of the documents, item C. I think we can if you.
We're talking about the recommendations on page 4.
On page 4, yes.
Page 4,
I'll
C.
move 1A to D.
A to D, been moved.
Noting that B will read, adopt the staff recommendations as discussed and amended during the hearing.
Yep.
Have a mover. Seconded by Lyndall. Any further discussion? I will put the motion. All in favour will say aye. Aye. Against, no. Carried. And 2, a motion that we advise submitters in writing of the council's decisions on the.
Move that, Mr. Chairman.
Moved by Lloyd, seconded by Robert. All in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That's all.
Item 7 and 8 to say we're not.
So on that note, I will consider the meeting closed and thank you for their contributions, and this is the end of a very long road, and while a lot of the public may not realise how much work we put into this, we actually have we've robustly debated and we've come to a decision, so